Meeting is being held on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish peoples. Meeting is being live streamed from there, and the audio and visual recording will also be available to the public for viewing after the meeting, and that the footage of the meeting may be reviewed inside and outside of Canada. First off, just like to send regrets. There's 3 trustees. They're at graduation ceremonies this evening. Regrets from Trustee Chan Pedley, Trustee Parrott, and Trustee Reddy. And they will, if they can, get back to this meeting after the grad ceremonies. Before we begin, if I can remind everyone of meeting decorum. The board has a strong commitment to ethical conduct. This includes the responsibility of the committee members to conduct themselves with appropriate decorum and professionalism. As chair of the committee, it's my responsibility to see that decorum is maintained. To do that, I ask all members, delegates, to request to speak through the chair, that's myself, rather than crosstalk of discussion between committee members. Okay, so committee members are quite aware of with regards to civility and just professionalism amongst each other. Okay. And it's pretty lengthy meeting. It's the last committee facilities and planning meeting for this school year. And as such, there are quite a few items on the agenda. The usual 2-hour meeting is now scheduled for 3 hours, sorry. It might feel like 8 hours at the end, but it'll up till 8 o'clock. Thank you. With regards to the delegations, there were 3 original delegations that were to present. There is the additional delegations with regards to Cecil Rhodes plaque at Local Beleng. My view that is more of an issue with regards to student learning and well-being. However, this is the only meeting from between now and when the board discusses that issue. The Local Beleng Cecil Rhodes plaque has not been presented to the board in any fashion, not to a committee. So so that's why I'm receiving this evening the delegation that signed up by the deadline of 12 noon last Friday, and that's in our policy. All right. And if there's any further discussion or requests, those that are requesting to be on, we're suggesting that a letter could be written to the board chair, and all trustees will get that information prior to the board meeting on Monday. Deadline for that is noon Monday for any written submissions. Okay. All right, so I will begin the delegations. First delegation, if Cecil is here this evening, representing Squamish Nations? No? All right. So we'll move to the second delegation, Seismic Upgrade Swing Space, Johnny Sandu, PAC Chair for Kingsford Smith Elementary School. And each delegation has 10 minutes, and then committee members can ask questions directly with regards to the presentation. Welcome, Johnny. You're very familiar with this committee as you've attended years and years of one-time committee 2, now facilities and planning, and your Kingsford Smith fair went very well, and many of the trustees in attendance were very pleased with how that went. So thank you.
I have to talk?
Yes, please.
Is it on? Okay, it is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you everyone for your time and your interest today. First of all, I just want to introduce, this is Nick Kumar. He's our treasurer, and Linnell Lamb, our secretary, and I'm Johnny Sandu, the chair. And we're here today, do I just tell somebody to go to slides? Is that how it works? No, as to move through slides. Oh, I got this. Thank you. We're here today really just to help the seismic process. One of the things that we saw as a PAC when we went through the process was there wasn't a lot of feedback from previous PACs documented as far as how they felt projects have gone or addressed. And as a PAC, you're kind of left to call other PACs and hope the same people are still on the PAC executive to collect that information and use it yourself through the process. So we're here to be part of the solution to that. So we're here kind of officially providing our feedback today. And for those of the members that were here last time when we did present pre-project, we committed at that time to come in and give us our feedback. So that's why we're here. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about just the structure. I don't know if everyone's familiar with our project. I know some are, like Jim, obviously, very closely. We spent a bit of time just talking about our PAC priorities, the overview of the project, a little bit of time, not a lot because we don't have a lot of time, just on a kind of our feedback as we saw it over the course of the project. But we're really going to talk about kind of the impacts of the project that we saw and then the recommendations that we're making to anybody that would take the recommendations, either the committee or staff. So our priorities as a PAC when we entered into this project way back in 2014 really was two things. One was ensuring the safety of our students and staff. So we're very supportive of a seismic program. And the second one was ensuring the well-being of our community during the course of the project. And most of the feedback you're going to see today is centered on those 2 points. So the project was for Kingsford Smith was the lowest cost option, which was a seismic retrofit of the existing facility. I think the budget was $11.8 million. The timing of the project from construction start was July 2017, with the return to September, which actually got extended out to November with some small lagging things that didn't get resolved till this month. The accommodation plan for us, because we couldn't be at the school, was to split us across McCorkindale, K-4, and Champlain Heights, 5-7. So the first phase of the seismic project was the consultation and the PDR creation. So there's really two kind of major groups of communications that happened during this time. One is the VSB to the overall parent group. And by VSB I mean the greater VSB staff, the principal and teaching staff. The second group of consultation really is the PAC reaching out to basically anyone that they can, to gain more information, possibly alter, certain aspects of the project or get more input into it. And there were some other factors during the whole course of that happened. Project office was created. The kind of the first LFRP was there. Trustees got fired, so we lost some traction there with some of the people we were talking to. So that was kind of the overall timeline for the consultation. What we saw, so this is observations. The PDR process, it's either not well communicated or understood or a little bit of both at that time, right? So this is very much the time that we went through this. And it wasn't always followed as we understood it. The second point really is, we weren't always sure if it was consultation or if it was information. And what I mean by that was there's certain times we felt that our input really wasn't addressed into the plan. And there was some cases where it was, but that's a little unclear, right? So that's why is it consultation or information? It's bundled right now as consultation overall. And the third one was communications overall. What we saw was we actually had pretty good communications from, I think the staff and then later the project office. Overall, when we reached out to VSB staff, they were responsive. We didn't always like what we heard, but they were responsive. We did have some challenges in communications where there were some hiccups. Like there was it was communicated that we were starting basically a year before we were, and then it was determined that actually it wasn't going to be possible. But that was communication sent out to all the parents. So there was some challenges. The construction phase, this really is kind of 3 sub-phases, is pre-construction. So that's really the staff and a little bit of parents just getting ready for the move. The second phase is starting in the new school, these are the swing sites. And then the third phase was the return back to Kingsford Smith for us. And sorry, KSM is Kingsford Smith for those that don't see the term. So those were the three phases. What we saw, our observations again was, so when the bus program started, we had some initial support from VSB staff, and this is really, kind of supervisory support, and it was often the district principal at the time, the acting district principal, and that was great. We did have some challenges with kind of drivers and start times initially. That was resolved relatively quickly, and the busing system as it was built posed some serious challenges to kind of families that had some, more complex or unusual child requirements. And in those cases, those people didn't use the bus. In the case of the swing sites, we had some early school-to-school issues, like kid issues, as far as, conflict, I guess is the best way to say it. The staff managed it very quickly. So that was good. One of the things we noticed, and this was actually one of the things that we did not anticipate or think about as a pack, there was actually a lot more work for the staff, and by that I mean the teachers and the administrative staff, in A, moving us in, and B, because we were in split swing sites, managing that over the course of the seismic project. And I do want to point out the two schools that we went to, both the staff and the PACs were excellent in working with us and very collaborative, so I just want to say thank you to them. The other thing that we did observe was really kind of the school operations. So there was some instructional time lost due to the move, and that's really because they were still moving into the classrooms. The boxes were there but not open type of scenario for the teachers. We had some difficulty setting up extracurricular activities because you need teacher sponsors, and the teachers were, I'll use the word stress, but they were encumbered with more work, due to the move and the swing sites, and we found that there was less teachers willing to sponsor events, and we had some teachers that became superheroes and sponsored everything. So, but that was a challenge for sure. And when we did return to the school, it was still somewhat of a construction zone. They weren't finished, so that posed some safety concerns, and the staff did work with us on it, and the outcome was okay, but we did notice that as well. So this is the impacts, and these next two slides are really where we'll spend a little bit more time. So student impacts, we talked a little bit about the kind of the reduction of extracurricular activities. We believe that's crucial to the development of our children, in the school, and I think everybody agrees with that. I know it's not always official, part of the school program, but it's a big part of it. So we saw some reduction there. The staff did a really good job of managing some of the issues we had around splitting our community. So when we split our community, we had grade 7s mentoring, younger kids, and that was important to us. So they managed that. They actually walked the kids between the schools to accommodate those reading and buddy programs and such. The kind of an unexpected benefit as well was the K6 and K7 students, 6 and 7 students, were at a school with their peers because they're in the same catchment as their high school, so they did develop some relationships before they got there. So that was a side benefit. Oops, did that move on its own? I'm running out of time. That's what it is. Somebody move the slide for me. Yeah, so family impacts, and I'll try to rush, sorry about the time. The family impacts, what we did see is the PDR phase actually creates a lot of anxiety, and I know there's other schools that have presented, and you see it quite largely in the seismic program. So lack of clarity, lack of understanding what you can alter, lack of understanding of, well, geez, how did other schools and PACs get through it? So it creates a lot of anxiety. The next point actually talks to a little about the impact on attendance. So when we started this program in 2014, which was the first engagement, we had 353 students in our school. When we returned to our school, we had 259. So that's a reduction of approximately 100 or over 25% reduction. And we know we don't own the numbers. You guys own the numbers, obviously. So correlation, causation, I'll leave that for you guys. But we know families left because of seismic, because they literally told us, including some of our active PAC members. So there's an impact there. Some of those impacts are, there's extra time, so there's adversity to the families, right? Because you got to drop your kids off early. In some cases, we had an 8:15 bus, so parents leaving earlier.
Sorry, Johnny, I'll have to, if you can wrap it up.
I'll get right to the next
Okay,
slide then,
thanks.
which is the recommendations. Thank you, Alan. Through the chair. So first recommendation is community engagement is to clarify the PDR process and steps. Clarify and be consistent on the scope of community feedback. So what can we provide feedback on and what can we expect to be done with that feedback? The second point with swing site transportation is more supervision, well, it really is longer supervision through the course of the year. That would help some of the families that need it. And more flexibility in bus scheduling. And what I mean by that is you weren't able to change your bus scheduling once you signed up to a certain time over the year because the staff couldn't manage those changes. Additional staff support for the in-class support. So this is staff and admin, so teachers and admin. For the course of the project, particularly for split sites. We asked for this. This was where I said we lost traction. We had asked for additional PAC support. So one of the things you'll see is PACs have a lot less involvement during the course of the project because the parents are busier basically living to the swing sites. So the PAC has less ability to organize community building events and they have less funding to do it. So we'd asked for some funding. We had a bit of traction and then the board changed. So we'd recommend some additional funding for PACs, either through the PAC or through the school to build community building events during the course of the project. And the last point was learn and share for projects. So we recommend that it's an official part of the process that you collect feedback from PACs, document it and share it with future schools, which is why we're here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Sorry for rushing the recommendations part, which is quite important. I'm just going to open it up for questions from committee members. Because you have so much information there and very specifics on ways to improve, this committee has spoken many a times as other projects go through, especially swing space projects, that we've always talked about experience, past experience. So this is very helpful and thank you for coming and presenting. Just wondering if there's a willingness, if there's to go over some of the more details, if the willingness to be in some sort of ad hoc committee that you could participate in, and we can drill down some of the more specific, maybe possibly set up some sort of template to work on this together, and some further questions with regards to, things that you might have went through with regards to the working group during the whole process and how that worked with a swing space locations of two. So a lot of questions. So it's really hard to get through those questions, and I don't think it's really even sincere if we just ask it publicly like this. So is there a possibility of working with the staff and board?
Yeah, we'd love to. I mean, it was one of the options was to work. We haven't officially talked to the project office yet, for this as a closure because it's not one of their actions. So yeah, we'd work in a subcommittee or whatever, whatever venue you think is appropriate to give us our feedback. Then yeah, we would.
Okay. And you're here at most of the committees, so we can just grab you anyways. Any other committee members? Questions? Anne.
Thank you, to the chair. The two probably top priorities for us when we look back at it is the additional staff support and probably the community engagement. The community engagement reduces kind of anxiety, helps PACs, advocate for their position if they know what they can or can't or what to focus on. And then the second part on the staff support, I think that would help with community building inside the PAC or inside the school community during the course of the project.
Thank you. If we can get, I haven't, it's not in my package, the slides.
I emailed it to, I can't remember.
We have them. Okay.
You do have it, so
great.
If not, I'll provide it again.
Okay. David said we have, so thank you very much. Thank you. We'll move it back to delegation number 1, Kilsalem. If you are, hi. If you can help me with the pronunciation, Senaqua development plans?
Sanok.
Senaqua, thank you. All right, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I have an image that I sent in that I think is going to be placed up on the screen momentarily. I'd like to begin just by sharing a few words in the Squamish language, and then I'll introduce myself for everybody here that might not know. So Tanoyap Anaquatal, Eighty Squilt Seats, Nelta Ans Salem, Tinachin Squamish Ochomeo, Chin Sait Sapnat to Squamish Ochomeo, Chin Tukum to Ochomeo. Chin Quinman Tomit Lanoyap, Tansequatal, 80 Squilt Seats, Anslate Quins Tuktatanate, Qui Hameas to Sanak Ochomeo, not tight, a Hatchin Squall when Quins Quachnomi up, 80 Squilt Seats. I just want to say in my language to each and every one of you, I thank you for this opportunity to be here. My name is Salem. I'm an elected council member for the Squamish Nation, as well as one of the 2 appointed spokesperson. I'm serving my first term on council and was appointed by the council as a spokesperson, as well as one of my colleagues, Aureen Askew. We also have 2 co-chairs that lead our council, which is Kristen Rivers and Joshua Joseph. And I came here on behalf of the Squamish Nation Council, as well as a letter that we had sent to the school board to discuss and bring attention to, I think, a very important issue, and I think also the public has heard about and seen in the news. The Squamish Nation, and I know I only have a short period of time here, and it requires much further dialogue and follow-up, which I think we're open to. But just wanting to share a little bit and kind of reiterate some of the plans and commitments that are very real for the Squamish Nation. And so on the map shown above is the outline for what is legally known as the Kitsilano Indian Reserve, but affectionately known by our people as Sanok. The reserve boundary originally went and included all of Vanier Park all the way over to Chestnut and then east. But of course, over a number of decades, the reserve lands that were originally given to us in the late 1800s was expropriated at behest of the city of Vancouver, as well as the province, and taken from the federal government. And at the time, if those governments wanted to take additional land from the First Nations, they had the right to do so. And so a number of the parcels of lands were appropriated from the Squamish people that were living there at the time. This culminated in 1916. Our people were forcibly evicted from the reserve lands. There was a number of houses kind of around Vanier Park and the beach where the people were placed on a barge and shipped to North Vancouver and removed from their homes, and their homes were burnt down. There was a number of longhouses that were there as well as some modern, or at the time, modern homes. And a number of families were given a payout. And so legally it was considered a purchase, but it was done through coercive means. And so the families relocated to the North Shore and some of our reserves there, as well as some of our reserves and communities in the Squamish Valley. This happened in 1913, correct myself. Almost a decade later, in 1926, the Squamish communities that were at the time separated, amalgamated into a single legal entity, which became known as the Squamish Nation or the Squamish Indian Band, which we are today. And so we became a single government to speak on behalf of the Squamish people. And what's really important about that is that in 1926, when all of a majority of the members of the various Squamish bands voted to amalgamate, and at the time, and I'll just raise this as a point, under the Indian Act and the laws across the country, it was only the men that were allowed to vote. None of the women were, including in our community in this decision. But they also still included Sanok as one of the reserves to amalgamate with the Squamish Nation, even though we had lost a significant portion of that land in the reserve community there. So our people still considered that our home. Of course, in 2001 to 2003, we had this portion of reserve lands returned to us. And then in 2008 and 2009, there was tentative plans put on the table to do some minor development, particularly 2 towers that were going to be rental as an economic development project for the Squamish Nation to serve the needs of our, at the time, around 3,000 members, 3,400 members. We've now grown to almost 4,100 members. That might change and increase due to changes at the federal level around membership and registry of Indian status to eliminate the discrimination towards our Indigenous women and their children and grandchildren. So we could see an increase in Squamish Nation members over the next decade as a result. But this site, given its proximity to the downtown location and the opportunities that exist and the value of the land from a real estate standpoint, it is seen as an opportunity for economic development for the Squamish Nation. 2 years ago, the Squamish Nation initiated an RFP, a request for proposal process, to an invitation to over 16 developers from Vancouver. As a result of the RFP process, approximately 9 developers indicated their interest in partnering with us on the development of these lands, and then 6 developers submitted proposals. And through a vetting process by staff and third-party independent reviews, 1 developer was selected for us to engage in partnership negotiations for the development of these lands. The developer in question hasn't been announced by the Squamish Nation, partly because we are still in active negotiations with that potential developer, and so I'm not at liberty to say who that is right now or confirm who that is right now. But I can confirm, and I wanted to stress to the school board, that we are looking at a master development plan for the entire site, unlike 10 years ago when we were only looking at 2 towers. We are looking at significant density, and I can't state exactly the square footage, but it was reported, I did confirm in the media previously, that we are looking at around 3,000 units of mostly rental, but also community amenity spaces and things like that, and a really well-designed community in the area. However, I wanted to bring this to attention because in addition to looking at this as an economic development site, the Squamish Nation is also looking at this as an opportunity for member housing. Because for us, not just making a profit or economic development off of this is an opportunity, this is also an opportunity for us to bring our people home, to return Sanok as a Squamish Nation community, and to have our Squamish descendants live there once again. And we are looking at a few hundred units of housing that might be allocated for Squamish members. And I raise this as the really important part of this development, because the reintroduction or the return of our people to this community means that in this area, there are going to be hundreds of Squamish families living there again. And what that means is that the neighboring communities, the neighboring opportunities that exist are going to be really integral to how we can work together on this, both for the benefit of the region, a lot of the businesses in the areas and things like that, but also thinking about what happens with things like schools in the area, both for, I think, the residents that might move in on the market rental side, but also for the Squamish people. What is it going to mean when there are 200 Squamish families living there, raising their children? And what schools are they going to attend? And what's the relationship going to be between the Vancouver School Board and the Squamish Nation as we return home to our community? And how do we build a good relationship so that the impacts of colonization, the impacts of what has now been determined as a genocide can be, those wrongs can be righted? And I think that there is a willingness by many people, I think with the school board, by the Squamish Nation, to think through how do we achieve reconciliation? What does reconciliation really mean in this age, both for the local communities as well as the broader public? And part of that for us is thinking through the impacts that have happened from the residential schools, the impacts of the disposition of our reserve lands, the alienation from our resources, all of those types of things. What would it be like if none of that had happened for our people? If residential schools hadn't happened, if from day one our people were in control of the education of our children, what would happen if the rights of our people to speak and be taught in our language happened from day one? Those types of questions really answer what reconciliation can mean for us, because whatever puts us on a path to get towards those goals is part of, for us, that reconciliation work. And I know the Vancouver School Board has been quite diligent at responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. We now have a number of recommendations as a result of the inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. There's a lot of items that we can work on together. And I think my message tonight and to everybody here is that this is a huge opportunity for us to work together. We really wanted to stress the importance of this, and I think in that any consideration that the Vancouver School Board has as it relates to some of the educational facilities in that area, the Squamish Nation really feels that it's important to understand that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples needs to be upheld, that the calls to action within the TRC need to be really supported, and that the Squamish Nation feels very strongly that there is going to be some development in this area and the return of our people to this area. And we are hopeful and optimistic that we can work together to address what our concerns might be, what your concerns might be, and how we might be able to work together on this. So just in closing, I'll say Tamat Kwetsi Kuyan Snachum, and I raise my hands to each and every one of you for this opportunity to hear my words, and I just thank you on behalf of my people and my nation and my council. Osiam.
Thank you very much, Cecil. Thank you for presenting. And foremost, that to come early and to give us this explanation and description, that so we can begin the work and connections earlier is most helpful. And the opportunity for us to work together is I think very important to have that earlier than later. Thank you very much. We had a discussion during we were talking about Hudson Elementary School and the close proximity to the development, and we just heard over the radio and the TV right at the same time. So there's been initial discussion. So thank you for coming in. We start this in a more heightened awareness of the area. I'm going to open it up for some questions from the committee members. If you could stay for a moment. Trustee Gonzalez.
Yes, thank you. I do have some questions, and it may be premature, but I'll ask them anyways. Just in terms of what's being contemplated in the types of housing, 1, 2, 3 bedroom townhouses, is it affordable rent versus market rental? Just if you have any insight into that, or if it's too early.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it is early, and it'll largely be, at this point, we're largely going to see where the market goes. And how some of our decisions will be based off of the feasibility of that. Some of it will be based off the feasibility of what kind of financing we get. We are pursuing options with the federal government, the provincial government, in terms of affordable housing type funding arrangements. But so that will change what the end up structure of units, cost, pricing, and all that kind of stuff. But it is, our goal for this site is largely rental, largely market rental. But then there might be other types of housing included in that.
Further? Trustee Gonzalez, any further? No. Janet?
I'd just like to add to Alan's thanks for coming to us early in the project. We have responded to the letter sent, and I look forward to myself and the board starting to build a good relationship.
Yeah.
Anne?
Sure. So I would say that it's a good question around timeline. In terms of our process, under the Indian Act regulations, the land must be designated by our membership. We'll be going to a referendum sometime, possibly in September at the earliest. We'll go to referendum. A majority of our members must vote in favor of the type of use that we're planning for the site. Once that is confirmed, in addition to the business terms. So sometime over the summer, we'll likely be announcing the partner who are proposing, and then propose to our membership a business arrangement. Once if their membership agrees to it, which they have previously, we would then look at securing the financing, and then site prep, and then moving into construction. With the amount of density that we're looking at, we would look at a phased approach. So we're looking at a development plan that might take place over a decade. And then we'd be looking at within the next, I would say, 2 to 4 years for moving in.
Thank you. And further with the phased approach, any thoughts of which area we'll begin in, because that'll affect where our schools are?
At this point, I can't, we're not sure yet.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I guess it's best to go through you for us, and then maybe there will be a committee set up in the near future. Okay. And without any further questions from the committee members, I thank you for coming. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Third delegation with regards to the seismic upgrade for Edith Cavell Elementary School. If I can ask for Brenda Kaplan-Brown. Hi, Brenda. For our recorder, could you also introduce your
Yes,
partner?
I will. Thank you so much for allowing us to come again and present to you. This is Allison Tito. She's also on the Seismic Committee at Edith Cavell.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Let's just go right to the next one. There's our school. So we thought we would start with images. Just to paint the picture about what we're discussing. So on the left side is on the bottom is the small amount of grass or green space available to our 330 students at present to play on. So you can imagine it's cramped, and even our intermediate students aren't even allowed to play there unless they sign an agreement that they won't play with any balls because it's too dangerous for the primary students. So the only space they have to play on and that our students have is the gravel field. And the picture doesn't really do it justice right now, but there is a cloud of dust around them. So you can imagine that, especially at this time of year, we're not as lucky as some other schools that have really nice large trees surrounding their gravel field. It's hot and dusty and terrible for children with asthma and allergies and whatnot. On the right side, these are pictures just to illustrate what the seismic people are calling the frame building, or block 3 of our school, is actually a portable that was built in the PDR. It said it started in 1920 to 1940 that it was built. So essentially the minute Edith Cavell opened, it was not large enough. So they started building this building. There's weird stairs to nowhere and stairs around the corner. So, and then on the bottom picture, you can see there's stairs down that way. So we have huge accessibility issues. Thus the abandoned bike that where if any parent comes to one side of the school with a stroller, or if someone's in a wheelchair, they can't get to the other side. You have to go all the way around the block. So the accessibility is also an issue. The next thing here is these are pictures of the frame building and the wonderful condition it's in. So the top, it's hard to see, sorry, these are little pictures, but the top is where a woodpecker hole was filled, and the other top picture is current woodpecker holes. The middle picture on the left is it may be hard to see, but that's a gap in the window. So you can imagine those windows are sealed, so they can't be opened. And then in the winter, all that cold air comes in. The other middle picture is the state of the floor. The bottom picture is the floor in the bathroom where it's all rotted, and the bottom picture obviously is the ceiling that's falling apart. So you can see that it's shocking to us that money is going to be invested in seismically upgrading this structure. It's truly at its end of life. So we've been pressing as a seismic committee to meet with Minister Fleming, and he finally agreed to it. And we met with him on April 24th to discuss funding for our seismic upgrade. We asked him questions like, why isn't Cavell getting a new build? Why was expansion not included this round as part of the capital funding? What would it take to get Cavell a new build or an expansion approved? And what can we do to help move our project forward? Like, what would it take? So Minister Fleming had these answers for us, that the discrepancy between the new build and the upgrade was too big. It was more like $5 million, 5.6. If it would have been more around the 1 or 2 million mark, then he would have approved it, because that money is just too valuable for the rest of the province. Minister Fleming felt that the VSB is one of the richest school districts in his province that he has to deal with, but they seem to be saving its investments for a rainy day. And the time is now. He thinks it's sunny and that you should spend and use the money that he's sending your way. It's sort of, and he mentioned, oh, I'll say this out, but he also mentioned, and I'm going to bring this up because he obviously mentioned it to me for a reason, that the VSB is sitting on a $40 million deal that he said if you acted on with the Francophone School District, and if you acted on that, then you can easily use that money to invest in your projects and make them better and the way that you want them. Options for a new build that we discussed. I have to add a caveat to this. Since I submitted my presentation, the Minister Fleming's office has been in touch with me to let me know that there was possibly a misunderstanding during our meeting, and that he by no means agreed to fund half of a new build. So that number should read 5.6 million as it was before, as in our PDR, not half for the new build. But so in my second slide, then that will make more sense. So I just have to add that because I discussed it with her today on the phone again, and she said, no, that was a misunderstanding. And so they're not willing to do that. But the new build, obviously, even at 5.6 million, makes tons of sense for you. And that's something that also Minister Fleming reiterated in our conversation. I'm not going to look at the lowest cost option over the life cycle of the building or deferred maintenance because that goes back to the VSB. So the person who should care about that is the VSB. And so they will need to put that money in to fund something that makes sense for them financially. So if you look at this, it's still almost $9 million in savings for you if you put 5.6 million into our project. So we still, as a seismic committee, feel that that is the very best option for our school. We would gain much needed play space. In the event of an earthquake, there will still be a usable school in the heart of the city and in our area because everyone else seems to be getting seismic upgrades as well. And it's an opportunity to fix the layout of the school and the way that the green area and the way it is right now. As you can see in this next slide, the new school, the plan would be to build it in the middle. So we would get rid of all of those portables and the frame building and we'd have all that space back. So options for consideration number 2, expansion. And we strongly beg of you to consider this. If the VSB invested 2.4 million, and when I spoke to the minister's assistant today, she agreed. This is something that he agreed to at the end of the meeting. He'd be willing to a conversation if you could come up with half of the money. He would match it. So you would save in future deferred maintenance costs from portables that need to be removed. Also, if you keep the portables the way they are, and if the wording in the contracts are approved, there's no way that one of the portables that you just moved there, the intermediate classroom wouldn't fit in there anymore, and a primary classroom can't go in there because there's no bathroom. So that would be another huge problem eliminated if you would get rid of those portables. No need to invest precious money in upgrading that 70-year-old portable frame building. And you would alleviate the existing overcrowding and wait lists in the Canby corridor schools, and students would gain the much needed green space. Okay, and that is a picture of what the expansion would look like. Yeah, so in this expansion, we would replace the portables would be removed, and then we would have 5 extra classrooms. So those 5 extra classrooms could serve Simon Fraser, where it's actually quite a quick walk. Like in the meantime, while we're waiting still for the Olympic School Village school to be built, those families could get on the SkyTrain. It's not too far of a walk. So those 5 classrooms, I think, could really, really help service the Canby corridor. So last slide. The time is now. We understand that there's a budget surplus and the allocation of the surplus is currently being discussed. The province is willing to discuss and match funding with the VSB, and the window is beginning to close on the chance to make meaningful and needed changes to our project because we're in the design phase already. And this is a relatively small investment to make a meaningful difference to the families. So just so you can understand, there were 98 kindergarten students who lost the lottery this year, just between Simon Fraser Elementary and Cavell. 98 this year. So all of them would be sent to other schools across the district. Our own PAC chair for next year was initially sent to Shaughnessy Elementary, and he shared with us that it was at great expense and distress to his family. He had to hire a nanny. He couldn't get into out of school care because he got in there late, and that happens to just in our small little area, 100 kindergarten students. The students didn't have any of their friends in the nearby play dates, all those things. You can just imagine what that's like to all the families in the Canby corridor that are now not winning lotteries to get into their schools. So my last slide, sorry, I'll get to it quick. The VSB has not added any capacity along the Canby corridor yet, despite the fact that the city of Vancouver is now into phase 3 of the Canby corridor plan. More builds are happening right now. The building right beside me is releasing 30 new units today that people are looking at. There's an open house. So all of those families will now be moving into our catchment. So I request, please consider putting forward a motion to invest in the future of students in the Canby corridor and Vancouver schools and our project by option number 1, new build 5.6 million, or option number 2, expansion 2.4 million. What a deal. So one other thing I wanted to add, just looking at this and on the phone discussion that I had today with the minister's assistant, she strongly suggested that I advocate that you conduct a catchment review and a program review, and those are 2 big things that they're wanting to see before they look at any capital funding for a district. And for example, program review, that the ones where students flock across the city to attend. And also I want to advocate that Edith Cavell be moved to the top of the list for this year's capital requests. I noticed that at the present False Creek Elementary is ahead of us, and they have yet to get their PDR approved. And I think that we deserve to be there on the top because we've been waiting and we desperately want it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you for your presentation. I have the beginning of your slide and your end of the slide, so unless it's elsewhere, do we have the rest of the slides? We have, okay. Okay, thanks for presenting that. I'm not aware of the discussion and the details with regards to Cavell's conversation with both Minister Fleming and his staff as well, but we'll have to look into that. Yeah, but it's been quite a while, April 24th, but.
Yes,
okay.
may I through the chair?
Yes.
When we left the meeting, I should add, sorry, Minister Heyman was also there, and he said Minister Heyman was also there, and he said to us, to our committee, please leave it with me. I will meet with the superintendent. And from what I understand, following up with Minister Heyman's aide or assistant, that he has since met with Janet Fraser and Superintendent Hoffman about this. So, but she said it was a private meeting and she can't share any details with me either.
Okay, thank you. All right, open up for questions from the committee. Janet?
So thank you, and I like the way you phrased the question, what can we do to move the project forward? And I know that you've been incredibly active in your school community to try to, to look at the best possible solutions. And, as a board, we have also reached out to the ministry about getting a new build because it is a better long-time cost option, and an expansion because of the need in the district. So as we discussed earlier, 5.6 million, the ministry may think we have money, and the ministry does dig around in our books, but, we do have limited capital funds. And at that time, 5.6 million is a challenge. We have put in, the expansion is in the proposed capital plan. And so that is a discussion that continues to go, we continue to engage with the ministry. I'm happy to meet again with the Seismic Committee if you think that would be useful as the liaison trustee for the Cavell School.
One other question with regards to, and I think you said it was the minister's assistant rather than the minister himself with regards to the catchment review and program review. Did they point to any specific direction with regards to that, or just a general comment?
I think there were, she mentioned it just hasn't been done for a long time and that you desperately need to do it, and that that is something that they are advocating, that they want to see that you're doing that before they look at seriously funding things.
Right. They didn't say like shrink the size of the catchment or anything like that. It was just.
No, that was,
comments. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you. If there's no other questions.
She,
Yeah,
one thing, she just mentioned that that they really look at approving the way that the requests for capital funding are submitted, and that it's important to them that they factor that into the decision, the placement on the list. So.
We had the last committee meeting, we had Oaks Creek, Olympic Village come in.
Yeah, I know. I know. I know. I support them too.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you very much. If there's no other questions from committee members, thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Fourth delegation with regards to, and the next 1, 2, 3, 5 delegations are with regards to the Cecil Rhodes plaque at L'École Bilingue. First up is L'École Bilingue PAC. Thank you. And if you could introduce yourself and your partner there.
Hello, my name is Brian Dos Santos. I am the Vice Chair and Chair-elect for the L'École Bilingue PAC. And this is our current past chair, Gwen Floyd. I'm here this evening to relay a message from the PAC that will clarify our position regarding the Cecil Rhodes sign, which has garnered much attention recently. In response to a DPAC discussion last year that raised the issue of signage being congruent with the values of creating welcoming communities for all members, a resolution was put forth at our 2018 AGM to ask the VSB to remove the Cecil Rhodes sign from the primary playground of the L'École Bilingue school. The sign was part of the floor of our old school, which was previously called Cecil Rhodes, but was renamed to L'École Bilingue in 1977 to recognize the first French immersion school in the VSB. When our new seismically sound school was erected, it is our understanding that the VSB took that piece of floor and mounted it to the southwest corner of the property. The PAC then discussed removing the sign versus keeping the sign for heritage and educational purposes. As well, a new motion of altering the sign was introduced. Another motion was then proposed for the L'École Bilingue PAC to ask the VSB to remove the sign from the primary playground area or to alter the sign from containing the name Cecil Rhodes to be done in consultation with the L'École Bilingue community. This amendment was then voted on by secret ballot and was passed by majority. The secret ballots were then destroyed. This motion has not yet been forwarded to the board due to several urgent issues that had to be addressed by the PAC this past year. It is, however, the position of the L'École Bilingue PAC to support a motion that would rid of at least the name part of the sign as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Gwen, anything to add, or that's?
I think just to let you know that we as a school community discussed the sign, and we do support an educational component to this, but we don't believe that it necessarily belongs on the school playground behind the primary basketball court.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I believe on Monday we had a discussion that was held at L'École Bilingue and hosted by a third-party arbitrator. I think the notes were submitted or will be submitted to the board. At that meeting, it was just a non-threatening venue for parents to discuss their opinions. And there were many great ideas that came out from that. One was on that lines of possibly moving the sign to an off-site area so that the heritage and the history can be preserved, just not necessarily on the school. So I think there was lots of great ideas from that meeting of what can be done. At this time, it's just that with our PAC, our position is that you would like it removed.
I'll open up for questions from the committee. Earlier, I think the 2018 motion, was the wording alter the sign, or is that's been changed since then?
The wording was that specifically that we were asked to either remove the sign or alter the sign from containing the name Cecil Rhodes. And if that were to be done in consultation with the parent community.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Brian and Wynn. Go ahead. Next delegation, Andrea Nicholson, with regards to Cecil Rhodes plaque at Lac Beaubien.
Thank you. Hello. I'm the alumni coordinator for Cecil.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm the alumni coordinator for Cecil Rhodes School, later elementary. I see some of you previously for Eric Camber as well. So Cecil Rhodes actually was the main feeder school to Eric Camber and Kitsilano. It's good to see that people have had discussion with regards to the tile, and it is an archival piece, a mosaic that is one of very few in the city of Vancouver and definitely in the board. It is what we could consider an insurable. My concern in hearing that there's been so many discussions is that the Cecil Rhodes alumni have not been invited to those discussions, which is definitely probably leading up to what's happening here, where the education isn't there for the understanding of the whole reason that that tile was retained. I would ask that I'm not going to repeat my letter that I sent in. I think it's pretty straightforward. And then if anyone needs to have a copy of it, I'm happy to share it with you. But I just want to share some additional thoughts since this has come forward. I must have over 200 plus emails from alumni, phone calls. And I think the main concern is that we by no means want to have any ill feelings with the current school by any means. I was one of the main people that came forward to Lake Hole, and the Lake Hole community at that time were very interested in joining together and having our centennial prior to the demolition of the school. And the students at the time were very excited to hear the history. If we didn't have our community, some of 2 and 3 generations of Cecil Rhodes families, that community wouldn't exist for all of us to enjoy now. The number of people that were students at that school and their families that went to war, World War I and World War II, deserve respect. All of us as students deserve the respect that we are the alumni, and that is our community as well. And unfortunately, due to the way that we change boundaries and things change with unique living situations with the apartments in the neighborhood at that time not accepting children, our enrollment went down. So the move to Falls Creek was made and Lake Hole took over the Rhodes building. From that point on, there's been a real disconnect in the community with the Cecil Rhodes alumni, with our Cecil Rhodes community, which is most unfortunate. And I think now that the school has been demolished and the whole manner in which that was held, there has been some real concerns with communication with previous boards, and it's unfortunate. And we hope that we can come together now and work together with current parents and staff and admin and ensure them that that Cecil Rhodes school is, that mosaic is an archival piece, and it is our last real connection, aside from the stairs that are part of the playground, with our community. That school was over 103 years old, serving our community. In fact, actually, it's nice to have Deepak here, and because the first PTA was created by a parent of Cecil Rhodes. She had 2 children at Cecil Rhodes. So the history of the number of people that have come out of that school and come back into our community, the heritage, the historical, the archival piece is so important. So we speak from our heart as well, and we want to work together to come to a resolution to keep that connection with our community. It's so very important. But we want to make sure as well that the alumni, that everyone is aware, the alumni are by no means condoning celebrating or glorifying Cecil Rhodes, the man. Cecil Rhodes was part of that British development. At the beginning, it was that influence. It just happened to be the name of our school. When I go back through, sorry, wasn't our fault. But
Sorry,
Rhodes
if
to,
I could
sorry.
just stop. If the delegation is speaking, if we can respect the delegation and so the committee can hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, that goes.
And we like to do that to be respectful as well, but it's a bit disappointing when this happens, unfortunately, because we speak from decades of families in that community that we see it. It is our red brick school. That's it. I look back to right to the opening of the school and the work I do, volunteer work with the board for our archives. At no time has Cecil Rhodes the man been recognized, been glorified, been celebrated. When we were at school, we knew he was not a good man at all. We learned more as we got older, and now we even know that much more. But to obliterate our history and our school, that neighborhood wouldn't exist the way it is. And I think a lot of our alumni would be extremely disappointed to see the way this is happening, where we come to the table to work together and come up with something that would work for everyone and be an educational piece as well. Because if we don't educate our students and empower them, then this is going to repeat. And that would be absolutely very unfortunate in our city. And history is our city. That's what's going to happen. We'll have no connection if we ignore our history. The alumni came forward requesting to put up a plaque of an educational piece. We did request that that tile be retained. We were not communicated with as to where it was going to be put. Nothing was communicated to us. It just arrived on the wall. To be at the base of a basketball court is a bit crazy when it's a cement piece. We agree with that, absolutely. But to damage further something that means to us, our red brick school, and we have the right to have respect for that as well. And I think I have a piece of the history in all of our schools in Vancouver. We were requested as staff to create the history to document it. And it actually provides a real speaking to our communities over the years. And the Cecil Rhodes one is amazing. And it's not, it's in the Vancouver archives. It wasn't in our board archives until we requested it. It's 33-page document, but it does speak. And what we look for, I think, for our students now in our communities is exactly what there was in our community when I look at growing up. I looked at some of the pictures from our sports day at Cecil Rhodes. The best part was decorating your bike or your trailer or your wagon. And there it was, Cecil Rhodes, our red brick school. Rhodes is brick red, skies are gray blue. Park your car and ride a bike too. Keep BC green, stop pollution. It was just always our red brick school. That's exactly what it means to us. And for us, it was our heart of our community. It was a safe place for blue collar families, for us as students to go to. There weren't play dates, there were activities, but mostly we played at that school ground. Arnie Hallgren, professional ball player, that's where he learned how to play. We have so many alum that have come forward when we were trying to do our centennial as well to tell the stories. We have someone from the class of 61 here today we've never met. And it's actually just, we're a great community. As alumni, we would support the current school, even though it's not the Rhodes School as such, but it's on that property and it's part of our community. And we want to celebrate with that, just like we tried to during the centennial year. And hope that we can have that opportunity. It is really concerning that the alumni in our community, some of them in their hundreds, still in their homes, have not been allowed to come to the table to discuss this as well, because there was history there before Lake Hole arrived, and a huge history at that, and in our community. So our the alumni presentation would be that we would like to come forward to be part of empowerment and education for our current communities, our students, our school community, admin, and parents, and work together so that we can also save our history as well in our community that we welcome new people to all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Sorry for that interruption there momentarily. Can I ask, I'll open it up for the committee members to ask questions. What do you mean by VSB insurable archive?
So in the VSB, we have archives that we would insure that are of a certain level where, for example, at Kitsilano, before we just did the centennial there, we had a mask and the Kitsilano, they are all irreplaceable pieces. They hold a heritage, a cultural, historical, archival presence, and Cecil Rhodes was 25 out of 25 in one standing and 23 out of 25 in another. That tile, unfortunately now damaged by the screws that were put through it, but that tile, there is no other tile in the city like it. There is no other tile that is in that kind of shape for the board for sure. And it was, that is like representative of our design and architecture of the time. You would see that on downtown stores, business front stores, or address, the name, and in some families' homes too, but
So
that's why.
It's a special designation
Yes.
for insurance purposes.
Exactly. It's an insurable. It's to be protected and secured. Yeah.
Okay. A sensitive question, but I'll just ask it because we have to ask it. The location you said was awkward.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the other schools, if there's some heritage factor, it's quite often if I remember correctly, for a number of the schools like Secord or so, some that to be placed, heritage stuff to be placed in the school. Has there been thoughts from the alumni? I'm not sure how it got there to where it is now. So
yeah, unfortunately, alumni came forward with funds as well to do a commemoration wall, an education wall, a communication about our school colors, our history, the community itself, the connection, so we wouldn't have this disconnect. We weren't allowed to have our centennial. We weren't allowed to have a walkthrough. There was huge disconnect in those days. And I know there's a few people around this room that were around when we started trying to work on this. We were advised that Lake Cole wanted a replacement. And I'll express that as in Lake Cole, as in community admin staff is what was expressed to me, and that they didn't want anything discussed about the historical piece or that the name of the school was Cecil Rhodes, nothing. So we had no walkthrough, no centennial. I had a number of parents that were current Lake Cole parents at that time come forward. We have their letters to say that they wanted to support that so we could join together as a community. But the wall for commemoration would have been what we would have wanted to do. There was no discussion of the tile at all. It was news to us when it arrived on the wall.
okay. So specifically, it could be placed elsewhere.
Yes.
That's not a.
Absolutely, as long as it's not damaged any further.
Open it up for Carmen.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you for your presentation. If I understood the PAC correctly, it sounded like they were saying they wanted removal of the piece, but would be supportive of an educational component, perhaps off-site, so not on the school property, if I'm understanding them. Is that something the alumni would be supportive of?
I think the alumni would like, as far as the tile piece, I think that needs actually a separate discussion. But as far as a commemorative piece and a notification that school was actually the first school on that site and the community was developed by it, we would like something on the property. We have the stairs from the school there. We have a lot of things we retain to add to part of it as well, but there's no communication of that. No one knows that. We would like something somewhere on the property to be remembered for our school and our community. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank
you
you
for your presentation. Next up is Aslam Bobilia. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. Aslam Bobilia?
Good evening. It's Aslam Bulbulia.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I greet you with the languages from South Africa. Sanibonani, Dumelang, Khuyaan, Lechai. I greet you with the languages from the land of some of my people. Namaste, Assalamu alaikum. I moved here from South Africa 2.5 years ago. And one of the beauties of South Africa is we have 11 official languages. It's a country of tremendous diversity. And when I think of Cecil Rhodes, that is someone who did not value that at all. In fact, he valued white superiority and white supremacy and the British superiority over all others. To see that name in Vancouver is painful. I think the way it's been spoken about is like there's the sign at the school. A few days ago, I went to go and see the sign. I'm 6 foot tall and the sign is bigger than I am. When we put up signs, it is not a neutral act of record keeping or historicizing. Signs, especially ones that size, that grandiose, tell a very important message. And that message is we are celebrating this person. There's no two ways about it. When kids see that name on a daily basis, there's no other way to interpret it other than this must have been a very important, significant person worth celebrating, worth remembering, because look at how big his name is celebrated and plastered up in our school. In South Africa a few years ago, many might be familiar about the Rhodes Must Fall movement, a movement at the University of Cape Town, where Black students protested the fact that there was a massive statue of Cecil Rhodes in the middle of the university campus. And a similar debate sparked about, oh, you know, if we remove the statue, then we're removing and erasing history. And that's not the case, because that argument doesn't take into account the meaning of statues. In fact, statues play a deliberate role of celebration, and the same way a sign that's more than 6 feet tall plays the role of celebration at this particular school. It's not the Black students who first raised objection to Cecil Rhodes's statue being at the University of Cape Town. It was in the 1950s when Afrikaners, Dutch settlers and the descendants of Dutch settlers actually objected to that statue being there, because Cecil Rhodes didn't just discriminate against Black people, but against anybody who wasn't white British. And seeing that sign, seeing his name, seeing the size and the grandeur of that sign at the school sends a message to students as well as to the residents of Vancouver that we don't really care about the messaging that we send out to people, especially those who have felt the impacts of colonization in sub-Saharan Africa at the hands of Cecil Rhodes and across the world. I think that it's good to remember this history, but it's also important to remember what public art and monument does and what it means. And anything that looks like that is not a neutral act. It's an act that has special significance that needs to be recognized as such. So as someone who hopes to have a family in the city, hopes to raise kids in the city, wants my kids to have an education that is full and complete, and through every single thing that we message to children, consciously, subconsciously, we need to send the message that we want to aspire towards an anti-racist education system. We want to aspire to a decolonial education system, one that values diversity, one that appreciates difference, not one that celebrates people who had a monolithic understanding of what the world should look like and valued themselves and their own superiority over any other. So for that reason, I just came as a concerned person from South Africa who has experience with this man and his legacy to say that that's not what I want to see in the city that I want to raise my kids in. Yeah, and I think that, you know, this debate about, you know, how do we keep it? Where do we keep it? I think that history belongs in museums. They don't belong in places that are where kids are being exposed to it, and where that image is being celebrated, and where that name is allowed to penetrate the subconscious in a celebratory way. There's so many. I mean, Salem spoke earlier about like the history of this land that needs to be remembered because of the deliberate erasure of those people. The city has very few artwork that is designed by Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, yet those are the people whose land that we're on. If we are to celebrate, if we are to remember, let us think very carefully about what we are celebrating and what's worth remembering. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Islam. If you can, a moment, I'll open up for questions from committee members. Questions? Shannon.
So I'd just like to reiterate Alan's thanks for you coming. I appreciate that you tied your past in South Africa to your future here in the city of Vancouver, and you're talking about having children yourself. And that, you know, I also came to Canada from another country. My kids are born here and they're growing up in the city. So that really struck a chord with me. Thank you.
Islam, may I ask a question? And it might be a sensitive one, and you don't have to answer if you don't. Just your thoughts of the plaque, or a plaque, or some plaque, because the history is that was the place of the school for those 67 years or so. That it be thought of as a learning experience to have that there for the students through curriculum. I don't know if some classes have that discussion or not. Your thoughts that to have that there to encourage that learning, that understanding, where we talk about appreciating diversity. Do you look at that plaque, or you see something where it can spur on that discussion in a positive way? Or is that just too painful or hurtful? Just your thoughts on that.
I think if we like, I find the terminology like quite difficult to grapple with, because when I think of a plaque, I think of like something that's about this big. And I think that, yeah, if we have a sign that's like, you know, a couple of like, I don't know, a few centimeters, like 30 centimeters by 20 centimeters, that's somewhere in the school, maybe in one of the passages, or as you enter the reception area, that says something to the effect that the school used to be called the Cecil Rhodes School. We recognize that Cecil Rhodes was a person who was behind some of the greatest atrocities and genocides known within the last century. For this reason, we recognize that it's important to change the name of the school and not celebrate this name and this man. This school stands for the values of anti-racism, decolonization, the furthering of diversity and inclusion. That's a great sign to put up in a school. A 6-foot huge celebratory mosaic tile piece that serves a very different function. And I think we just need to be open and upfront and honest about that. Yeah, and I can think of, you know, in South Africa and around the world, we have similar debates, and there's lots of precedent for this already, and it's worth taking a look at that and thinking about like every single thing that children are exposed to has an impact, and what is the impact that that's going to have.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this evening. Next delegation is Richard K. Lowy. If I'm pronouncing that right. Thank you.
Thank you for this moment to present or to talk to you all. And I've had just a very interesting experience because I grew up in Vancouver. I went to Cecil Rhodes. It was a great school, had a great childhood. We lived a block away. I never knew what or who he was until Andrea told me about that. And a little bit about my background. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a story here, is that my father was a Mengele twin. Do you know who Joseph Mengele was? You know Auschwitz, okay? Massive genocide. So I have been speaking and telling my father's story and going around pretty much the world now. I'm actually going to be in Cape Town, and I'm actually going to be speaking at the Apartheid
Sorry,
Museum.
Richard.
Sorry, this is leading to something.
Directly to the chair, if you don't mind.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. And so part of it was that I was just asked to go to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, and I was just there 2 days ago. And I will be speaking there and about my father's story, these atrocities, etc., coming up probably in January. And as the curator was taking me through, and the CEO was taking me through the museum, they showed me this display. And I'm curious of how many people know who Aung San Suu Kyi is. The leader of the Myanmar. And back in, I think it was 2007, she was given an honorary Canadian citizenship. And as part of that, what they recently did at the museum is they did this beautiful display of all of these people who have been given honorary citizenship. As a result of what's happening right now with the genocide that is taking place in Rohingya, I don't know if I'm saying all these correctly, they've stripped her of her citizenship. And the challenge with the museum is that they've built this display and she's part of the display. And they have this whole tribute to her. And they were now challenged what to do about it, how to deal with it. Do they take down the display? What do they do? And it's backlit, it's a beautiful display. So what they did is they dimmed the light on it and they put up a large, not a small plaque, but a large display telling about what was going on. And they amped up the story. So the children and the people going through there can learn about who this person is and what happened and about the atrocities that this person has supported and not spoken out against. So I think you have a great opportunity with Cecil Rhodes, in the, not just at Cecil Rhodes, the school, and the size of the piece, the artifact, doesn't bother me or concern me as much as the statement that you make around it and how large you tell this story. So it can't be just something for Cecil Rhodes. I think it should be something in the school system, that one of our schools was named after somebody that committed these atrocities, and it should be part of the curriculum that is part of the history of not only Vancouver, not only South Africa, but something that could be taught in the schools. And you have an opportunity to make something of this, to make it quite large, because obviously these people are here, these people are hurt by what has happened and who this person is. So I think there's an opportunity to turn this around and use this as an opportunity. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. One moment. Any questions for Richard? Okay, thank you very much for presenting this.
Thank you.
Delegation number 8, Peter Teven. I think I got that one pronounced correctly, isn't it? Close enough again. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the committee chair and members of the board and staff. Yes, thank you very much. Which button do I press here? The arrows? Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Peter Tevan, and while I live in North Vancouver district these days, I grew up about 190 meters from the school that we're talking about here today. Richard was the bigger, cooler kid in our neighborhood. I was about maybe 50 meters from him. I want to thank you for affording me the opportunity to appear before you today. I have to admit it was difficult to respond in time because I only found out about this meeting and this item on your agenda 2 hours before the deadline. So forgive me if my notes and slides are a little thrown together. A few little points. My father was born in 1923 here in Vancouver, and he grew up in the area and attended the same school in grade 4. He went on to attend Kitsilano Secondary, was in UBC Engineering School during World War II, founded with 3 other partners, a civil engineering firm, which continues in the hands of the 3rd generation of partners even today, and they helped build a lot of the infrastructure of this province. I attended the school myself from 1967 to 71, and then again in 72 through 74. And for you on the school board, you might be interested to know, I then went on and joined the first mini school program at Prince of Wales under Dr. Len Druggy and later Dr. Pauline Weinstein, who we called Doc in those days, for those of you who remember that great lady, from 75 to 80. Our family home was 160 meters from the school on Richelieu Avenue. My family on my mother's side moved to British Columbia in the 1870s, and on my father's side in 1903 here to Vancouver. This is a picture of the grade 4 class in about 1930 or 31. And my father's family lived somewhere between Arbutus and Oak Street in various rental properties for decades. And my father attended Cecil Rhodes Elementary in grade 4. You can spot the legendary T-Van satellite dish ears there. Unfortunately, it's a trait that I didn't keep up because I was adopted. This is the same grade 4 class, 1971. You can see Andrea at the top right and the class clown over on the left side. The point of showing you these photos is telling you the story is to demonstrate that there is a lot of history surrounding this school. And forgive me my opinion, but it's history that the prior school trustees seemed all too prepared to stamp out to the best of their ability. They ignored our pleas to preserve and respect. They ignored the heritage building status conveyed upon the site, and they ignored multiple voices asking for a little consideration. I'm not sure whom they were heeding. It's kind of hard to tell, but we definitely know our voices were disregarded. I think you have to ask yourselves a question of, are you going to try to pay heed to all voices or just pander to a few? There was a quote online. I'm sure you're aware that this has kind of unleashed an online storm of debate. And there was a quote the other night that I want to repeat these words. I, for one, am able to remember my great times at the school without having to associate them with the awful history, more than not a nice dude, in my opinion. I know that you and many others won't agree, but can we not please crap all over everybody for having different opinions? I respect yours as I hope you respect mine. I think this is a very good basis to go forward on. Respect each other's opinions. And mutual respect is a very, very important concept. But history, as they say, favors the victor. History gets to be written by the conquerors, by the victors. And the question here is, will you guys designate who the victors are, or will you include all of history? I like the idea of supporting differing opinions. So let's talk about that just a little bit. I suggest to your committee and to the board that respect is demonstrated by acknowledging each other and taking what is good about each point of view and bringing them together into a new understanding. To override or stamp out completely another's point of view, to eradicate their history and legacy, how is that any different than the colonialism that created the problem in the first place? To me, it's the same thing. Is let's co-opt history, let's change it, and act like it was never there. I can tell you, as an alumni, that's how I feel at the moment. So let's look at the local area. You have Montcalm Street leads to the school. You could describe General Montcalm as a French imperialist and murderer of innocent British troops. Tecumseh, a native warrior and chief, you could describe him as a colluder and sympathizer. The names McRae, Angus, Matthews, Selkirk, Cartier, Balfour, Hudson, Laurier, King Edward, and all of them are in this neighborhood. Does this committee and board propose to go and change all that history as well? Richelieu, my street. I'm not sure whether they're commemorating Cardinal Richelieu of the Musketeers or the Richelieu class of battleships, but are we going to change that too? General James Wolfe, Sir William Osler, now that's the one good one that I could find, a physician and one of the founders of Johns Hopkins Hospital, but those are all within 1 or 2 kilometers of the school. I submit to you, if you erase history, you're going to be destined to repeat it. Every event in history, every person, if I put it into a modern context, has big problems looking backwards. I recall seeing a 1940s era Time magazine that talked about this terrible thing where they found out that fluorine in the local water supply was mottling the children's teeth. And it was only a little bit during this article that they finally acknowledged that if you oxidized the fluorine and turned it into fluoride, it actually helped defeat cavities. But how little they knew in those days about the value of fluoride. There's a lot of history, not only in this school and in this neighborhood. We have a lot of historical names. Many are still considered heroes, but if you look back, would you still call them heroes today? Like they were heroes when we put their names up on the streets. But I think that if you look through a modern lens, you could look at people today and we look at the great work that Bill and Melinda Gates are doing across this world. 100 years from now, will we say, gee, they were terrible people. They didn't pay a living wage to their Indonesian employees. You know, my point is, looking back, you can always say, we just seem to take the bad out of people and never acknowledge. Now, in this case, we're talking about a school. And the plaque that you're discussing is not a sign. The reason it's so large, it was the former front doorstep. And it was taken off the doorstep. So, you know, to those who don't like Rhodes, I think you can be quite satisfied that people used to wipe his feet on his name, because that was what you walked across entering the main entrance of the school for decades. This was the one piece that the former board agreed to retain. I think there was a couple more Andrea mentioned, but this is the only one I think that had the name of our school. So we see it as somewhat valuable to our history. And I can tell you, I also see this happening today, where we seem to forget the actions out of history, and quite frankly, what it dooms us to doing is repeating those same mistakes. This is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity, first of all, for this board to honor a commitment made to the alumni to retain this piece. It's an opportunity to honor the architectural legacy of what was previously declared as the number 4 at-risk school of heritage value in the Vancouver school system. And it's an opportunity to teach and inspire today's young people to come together to an understanding of looking at history through a modern lens and putting it in context, rather than, you know, trying to do, I mean, Harry Potter was right. You don't ignore the name. You acknowledge the name, even if it's evil, and you defeat it. You educate yourselves. And this is an opportunity to redeem the failings of this guy, Cecil Rhodes, by teaching people more fully about the few successes he had, like founding the Rhodes Scholarship, and the many failings that he had being a colonialist and an exploiter. So here's our request is, please leave the former door landing mosaic on the property. I said here in place, but I mean somewhere on the site. Please add a plaque, and a prominent one, explaining the man Rhodes and detailing his great travesties and his few accomplishments. And then explain why there was a controversy and why you chose to honor the legacy of Cecil Rhodes Elementary School, the school, and have people grow in their understanding and grow in their mutual respect. Many would say that colonialists tried to erase Indigenous people. Today, you open the meeting by acknowledging their heritage. We're not objecting to the portrait of Her Majesty the Queen over top of the chair's head. Why not those things? Why do we keep those symbols and not others? I understand there's a difference, but let's not erase the legacy of this wonderful school. Too much of it has disappeared already. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. One moment. Any questions, comments for Peter? No. Thank you for presenting, Peter. Okay, that's it for the delegations this evening. Usually I would, given there are many here specifically to present and to listen with regards to the L'école Bilingue and the Cecil Rhodes sign. However, this is a notice of motion from Trustee Reddy. So given that I presume she'll be coming later, she's at a grad ceremony. So I would suggest everyone, if they're wanting to stay, oh, Janet.
So I have a communication from
Jennifer.
Trustee Reddy that she won't be able to make it this evening, but she will be able to come tomorrow evening to my conversation.
Your conversation, okay. So Trustee Reddy, okay, so she won't, so I'll leave the agenda as it is. Because it will basically be just reading in her motion at 3.3 in the agenda. Just wanted to summarize with regards to the motion, it has not touched, aside from this evening through delegations, any, not through the board, not through any committee. So we're just receiving the delegations ahead of time. This is very, not through the usual process. Usual processes go through the board, committee, and then have that discussion. So just want to be very clear that this is not a normal way of going through this. The motion, I was told, will be coming to the Monday board meeting on the 24th. I know there are a number of delegations or a number that wanted to present as a delegation. Just so everyone's in the room, that if the motion is not moved or deferred or just presented as a notice of motion, because it's specifically a trustee's motion on the 24th on Monday, it could be, and I'll share at that meeting, that there were a number of delegations that wanted to present. I'm not sure from that point if it will be referred for committee for more delegation to present in a future date, or if the motion will be moved. So I'll just leave it at that because I don't know. It's a motion that will be coming on the 24th, potentially a notice of motion or a motion itself. All we need is someone to present, another trustee to second, and to have it on the floor for discussion. Janet will like to follow up with something.
I can just let you know, Chair, that the request has been that it comes as an urgent motion and be voted on at the meeting itself.
Okay, very good. I will at that meeting also state that there are a number of delegations that wanted to present, and what the decision of the board at the time will be the decision of the board. Just for clarification for committee members. The reason why we don't, and usually I don't, this is a committee meeting, but I'll just answer that one quick question. It's not the time, it's that it's fairness for those who submit. Some people look at the policy and look at the deadline for delegations to present. There were a number of people that were requesting, and it would be unfair to pick and choose. Some people don't call in, some people look at the time. So I will share with the board on Monday that there are a number of delegations that wanted to be delegations. They didn't pass the time, and the board can make that decision on Monday whether we don't have that vote and continue on with the delegations at a future date. I will share that. Okay. Having said that, we will move on with the agenda item. Agenda item 2.1. Update on seismic projects, information session, Jim Machino.
Thank you, and through the chair, the following reports are contained under item number 2.1. There are 4 schools that we had information meetings with respect to seismic upgrades. Those schools are Selkirk, Weir, Byng, and McQuina. It's customary for us to have open houses or information meetings.
Oh, hey, well, if everyone can sit down, just one more announcement. The The vice chair of the committee also stated that the chair of the board, Trustee Fraser, will have an opportunity tomorrow. And if Trustee Fraser can share with everyone in attendance.
We weren't able to schedule an additional formal meeting or extend the formal meeting to tomorrow, but I have reached out to those delegations that Trustee Wong referred to be able to speak directly to myself and any trustee who's available on that evening. The people who requested to be delegations but didn't meet the deadline, then I have requested that I have invited them to meet with myself and any trustee who's available to present informally to the trustees. There is also the opportunity to present written materials to the board, as Trustee Wong spoke about earlier in the meeting, and that information will be collated and put in the board agenda or the board minutes for this Monday's meeting.
I will be sharing with the board on Monday, the 24th, that there were a number of people that wanted to present. And to be fair, that if, in my view, this should be going to the Student Learning Wellbeing Committee. And I'll let the chair of that committee and the board itself decide that if they want to receive or they should be receiving. And I will share that is the request from many of the delegations, that the vote not happen on the 24th, but to have further delegations. I will share that. What the board does with that is up to the board. So just so you're aware and keep you posted. All right. Now we will move on with the agenda item. And sorry, Mr. Machino.
Thank you. Through the chair, the following 4 reports are bundled together under item 2.1. They were represent information meetings that were held at Selkirk, Weir, Byng, and Maquina with respect to the seismic upgrades of those schools. It is typical for staff to have information meetings at schools once there is information with respect to how the project will proceed through the construction. These meetings are to inform the school community about the scope of work and the time frame for their schools to be seismically upgraded. I'm submitting these reports for information tonight, and I'm hoping that most have had a chance to read the reports. There was nothing controversial that came out of the open houses or information meetings at the school, but if there are any questions, I can respond.
For all 4, Jim? For all 4, okay. I'll open it up. Any one of them, Selkirk, Weir, Byng, or Maquina. Okay, thank you very much. Well presented, Jim. 2.2, 2019-2020 Annual Facilities Grant Spending Plan. Jim and Doug. Doug, sir.
Thank you, through the chair. Still getting this up. So the 2019-20 AFG, that's the annual facilities grant that the ministry gives to address maintenance renewal needs within the district. Our grant is identical to what we had last year at just over $11 million. And that represents, frankly, about 0.7% of our total renewal of all our systems in the schools, which would be like $1.6 billion. So it's never enough, frankly. We have to prioritize. And I think actually even in some of the pictures you saw earlier, you could see that we have our challenges keeping up with what we need to do in order to keep our buildings safe and in good condition for providing a proper learning environment. But in any case, I've also attached to the report the list of projects that we will be submitting to the ministry. That list is about 230 projects long. And again, we are unusual in the province in that we do the majority of that work with our own in-house trade staff. And that is through actually the contract language we have, but it also gives us better control and we think a better quality product at the end of the day. And so that's about it. Any questions?
You're not gonna stretch this one out for your last one? Thank you.
Last time.
Okay, open it up for questions, comments from committee members. Anne.
Microphone it. Wondering whether Garibaldi Elementary, is that the main school or the annex that has a drapery cost?
Oh. There's the annex, I believe.
Is the annex at risk for closure down the line?
Through the chair, Jim?
Through the chair, the annex is currently used for purposes for staffing purposes. Our DLS group is on the second floor of the annex. There's also use on the ground floor. So while there is no enrollment at the school at present, it's still used for district purposes. So we continue to need to spend money at that school regardless whether there's enrolling students or not.
And just a couple of other ones that we were curious about, which were some of the newer elements that appear to need replacing, which would be flooring at McGee and Lord Nelson's elevator, because our understanding is Lord Nelson has a new elevator and McGee, of course, is one of the newer schools. So if it needs flooring replaced already, that's a bit of a red flag to us.
Through the chair, in terms of McGee, there's been several issues with the school. Sometimes our newer schools do have issues, frankly, and do require issues addressed, whether it's flooring or ceiling materials or building envelope, frankly, even. And it's just one of those things that, yes, we try to address the priorities, and McGee appeared to be one. Sorry, the other question?
Oh, that was the elevator at Lord Nelson.
Lord Nelson. Yeah, sorry, I think
there's quite a few. We can get back later.
Yeah, I could get back to that, but as far as I know, that is not that is just some repair that has to be done to keep that elevator or had to be done to keep the elevator working.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Anybody else? Mr. Leda?
Thank you, Chair. Just through the chair, just a question with the motion that went through last year with lead and water. What I'm seeing here, is that a reflection of that work? Yeah.
Yes, yes, through the chair, there are several items in there, and a lot of them relate to the bottle filling station program that was approved through the board last year. And so we are doing, that's part of a 3-year program to get bottle filling stations in every elementary school. And then we will have, at that point, we'll have them in every school in the district.
Through the chair, on page 3 towards the bottom, we have a number of waterline pipe upgrades, starting with Britannia, Churchill, Gladstone, Prince of Wales. So there are a number of waterline upgrades as well. Some of those may have to do with replacing sections of waterline that are lead solder joints. Yes.
Yes, and through the chair, there's also some items in there for some washroom fixtures and whatnot, upgrades there. Again, we don't get anywhere near the money we need to keep our facilities in really good shape. So what we have to end up doing is looking at our facilities and saying, you know, those washrooms, the sinks are so old, they're starting to not be able to be maintained properly. The porcelain finish on them has erased itself, and we're looking at rust coming through. We have to do things like that, and we have to do that to keep, again, safety and health at the forefront.
Yes, really.
Thank you. Through the chair again. So we allocated some extra money to fix some of those nasty washrooms. So would that be added to this? Because the numbers are the same, but wouldn't that have put the budget up slightly with that new influx of funding?
Through the chair, yes, we did. There was some more funding that's not shown here. It's also shown in as it was SEP funding, the school enhancement program. So there were some funds that were directed there to washroom upgrades as well.
Through the chair, we also added money in the budget for next year, the operating budget for next year for washroom upgrades also, which, you know, on Monday night when the board does third reading of the budget, then that money would be available to supplement what you have in your AFG and what's coming through from this school enhancement program.
Always much appreciated.
Anybody else? Jill?
Yeah, question through the chair. You mentioned the 0.7% of the total renewal of funds. So that's a percentage of the amount of money that would be required to maintain buildings to a certain standard. Is that?
Yes, through the chair. We have, the province had what they call the capital asset management system. And that's VFA is the acronym for that program that looks at all our value of all the replacement of all our systems, whether it's the lighting systems, the heating plant, the flooring, whatever, the windows, you name it, roofing, painting, everything. So the value of all those systems, when you add it up for our schools, amounts to $1.6 billion. Actually, coincidentally, that it amounts to $16 billion in the entire province, approximately 10 times as much. But so we are getting 0.7% of that, and that has resulted in us. We've been getting that kind of percentage for a number of years, and that's resulted in us, and you might have seen it in the front page of the Sun weeks ago, you know, 740 million of deferred maintenance. And you know, with the 11 million a year that we get, we can only touch that. And frankly, we keep adding deferred maintenance.
Just a follow-up.
Yes.
And I remember a few times when we've done this in the past, and is there a standard or an industry standard of a percentage of what usually is needed to maintain buildings that?
Yes, through the chair. And there's a couple standards. The federal government did a study a few years ago in 2013, and they came up with the formula that they were looking at all the Aboriginal schools and what kind of renewal needs they would need as a percentage of the value of the building systems. And they came up with the standard being 2.9%. Now, we also have the Building Owners and Managers Association called BOMA, which is well recognized as another standard, and their standard is 2%. So by whatever standards, we're sort of a quarter to a fifth or so in that range of what a normal standard would be in terms of those institutions.
Jill. Anything else? Thank you. This school board every 2 years, and because you have to be every 2 years, brings a motion to the BC School Trustees Association with regards to the annual facilities grant. I'm not sure, can't ask you directly, but I'd like to capture some of that information because the feeling is that we didn't do it this year, but next year it'll be going back to the BC School Trustee Association with regards to another motion to increase the annual facilities grant, as there hasn't been an increase in all these years. So just hope we can capture some of these information, or we'll get this because strong feeling that this board will be bringing back to the BCSTA motion as a motion with regards to the increase for the annual facilities grant. Also, question with regards to the funding. The amount hasn't changed for many years. There were a couple of years where there was it wasn't called AFG, it was called something else that was just as a bump up. Is there that in here, or how does that work?
All right. Through the chair, I'll try this. I think David might add something, I'm not sure. But yeah, so you go back far enough, it was called the Annual Capital Allowance, ACA, instead of Annual Facilities Grant, AFG. And of course, if you go back, there was, for our district, it was like $5 million. So there have been bumps over the years. But if you look at what's happened in the last several years, and you said, well, it's gone up a hair, not much, because we had 10.8 million a couple of years ago, and we've had around 10 million for several years now, probably close to a decade. And then you compared that to the construction inflation guides. We're in trouble on that one because the last 5 years, I think even that construction inflation is close to 40%.
So we definitely, this committee, this board needs to do something, and the time frame would be for the BCST AGM would be, I think, the January, February time frame. So we have to keep this on the books and to get that information. Sorry, Secretary Treasurer wanted to add something to this.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to also point out that the district is submitting a report to the Ministry of Finance Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services by the end of the month. And one of the items in that is to talk about a deferred maintenance program and the lack of AFG funding that exists, not just in Vancouver School District, but in all school districts in the province. So that will be addressed there also, in addition to a future motion perhaps going to BCSTA.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Barb.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering the 0.7%, I guess that is, that we get from the ministry. Does every district get 0.7, or how does that work?
Through the chair, the districts don't get the exact same 0.7. They're all probably pretty close within that. As David has pointed out, in the overall, the 115 million out of the total value, replacement value of say 16 billion is also very close to the point, it's the 0.7%. But within individual districts, it will vary slightly because the ministry has a bit of a formula that they use. And actually, Vancouver suffered slightly on that formula because it relates to student population as well as the age of the buildings. It's a combination. At one point, it was more biased towards straight the area of the buildings and age of the buildings. But quite a few years ago now, the ministry changed that formula, and they also include student population as a factor in calculating their AFG grant.
So it's sort of like prevalence funding for buildings. It seems they're, in other words, they're treating the districts equally and not equitably by looking at, Chair, by looking at the amount of money that's needed to make our schools safe. They're looking rather at a base 0.7, but that changes a little bit, but they don't look at what's really the key thing in our schools, and that's what we need. Instead, they're looking at some other thing.
And it's shockingly not sufficient for anybody, not even near that amount. Any other comments, Brent? Thank you. So the AFG covers both labor and material, like both.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Point taken. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay,
So through the chair,
yeah.
I would tend to agree with Brent that certainly our staff do work very hard and do an excellent job with the money that we have of trying to make sure our schools are as safe as possible and as in best condition as possible given our limited resources that we have. And that's part of putting together those lists is that the list that VFA would have is thousands of systems long, but all we can afford to do is a few hundred of those. So
It's shocking, the AFG, the amount, and there hasn't been an increase or anything. It's truly shocking. So BCSTA for sure. Again, thank you, Doug. And if you can stay for the rest of the meeting, thank you. 2.3, David Thompson Secondary and Gordon Park Potential Land Exchange Option Park Board Approval Update. Jim DeHoop, sir.
Thank you. Briefly through the chair, I'll provide a verbal update on the proposed land exchange agreement between the Vancouver Park Board and Vancouver Board of Education. As you're aware, in late February, there was an information session held to consider a land exchange between Gordon Park and the David Thompson Secondary School site. The David Thompson Secondary School is H1. It's in the seismic program, high risk. 3 options are being studied, and we wanted the consideration for a 4th option, that's building a new school on the north portion of the park. So on February 28th, there was a public information session, and there was an online and in-paper survey as well, and we had 86% of the survey respondents supported the option of the potential land exchange. And then on May 29th, the Vancouver Board of Education approved the potential land exchange, provided that option is the best value funded option and subject to the execution of a land exchange agreement. And subsequent to that, on June 10th, a couple weeks ago, the Vancouver Park Board did approve unanimously the authorization of staff to initiate a land exchange negotiations with the school board for an equal area of land subject to a number of conditions. And those conditions are provision of suitable alternative Vancouver School Board fields to accommodate displaced Gordon Park users during construction, and we've certainly highlighted potential at Tupper School and John Oliver schools to do that. The other condition is the resolution of the 53rd Avenue road allowance. So in the scenario where there's a new park at the south portion of the land, there is a road allowance that would bisect the park, and that's a road allowance with the city engineering department, so that needs to be resolved. It's a technical matter, it shouldn't be a problem. And then, of course, reinstatement of and enhancements to a new Gordon Park. So those are the conditions. There was also appended to the report, there's quite an extensive PowerPoint from the Park Board staff itself. And there's a couple of items I could bring to your attention. One is that they reference the Fresh Roots school garden that currently is to the south of the school as a community garden, and in fact it's a school educational garden, so it's not really a community garden. So that was discussed at the meeting, that there's just to clarify that the status of that community garden and where it would end up. Also in the PowerPoint from the Park Board, you'll see that there's a number of technicalities that would have to take place as well, and that has to do with the city, the Vancouver Charter requires that there be a 2/3 vote, majority vote from the City Council and the Vancouver Park Board to give up the park status. And that would be a temporary measure until, of course, simultaneously we grant the land to them. So those are the technical requirements, but all indications are that it's definitely a potential option. We're going to study it further. So the Vancouver Project Office is doing the work to study all of the 4 options, and we're bringing back a future report to the committee and board. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Jim, for presenting the report and moving this along. Up for any questions, Jim? Very clear. Thank you very much. Thanks for moving it along through the process and the steps. We do have a question. Trustee
Sorry,
Gonzalez.
yes, through the chair. Just was there any consideration given to using this school as a swing site school, given that it's going to be a brand new school? Obviously, it would affect the park and the use of the park. But I'm just wondering if that ever came up as a thought.
Through the chair, the way that it was described at the board meeting is that Park Board would be doing the VSB a great favor in allowing the land exchange in the event that it's the least cost option to build a new school. That would take the park out of service for quite a few years. We didn't have that conversation with the Park Board with respect to continuing to disrupt the park for years more, for the old school to be a temporary accommodation site. We thought it would be best to respect the fact that we want to convert the old school site back into park as quickly as possible so that the users of the park can reuse that park as it normally was. So the discussion of Thompson being a swing site wasn't discussed with the Park Board or the Ministry of Education.
Follow, or that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for the presentation. Discussion item 3.1, notice of motion. That was myself. During the Henry Hudson Elementary School discussion with regards to French immersion, from there stemmed a notice of motion by myself to this committee. It is recommended that a future expansion of Henry Hudson Elementary School, independent of the seismic project, be included in the 2020-2021 5-year capital plan submission. Just asking the Secretary Treasurer, that's the motion, was to have that discussion. We don't, and the issue with regards to the capital plan is before us tonight. We don't have to do anything with this. There's no vote, there's no going back to the board. It's just to assure the committee that that was discussed and the request to have it in the 5-year capital plan. That's all we need to say, right?
Through the, yeah, Mr. Chair, we have included in the 5-year capital plan, and when the board approves the 5-year capital plan on Monday night at the board meeting, then that project would be part of that plan.
Thank you. All right, just a quick comment, and we're aware even tonight's delegation from Cecil with regards to potential development in that area and current overcrowding of the neighborhood schools as well. So that was the reason for that actual motion itself. Questions, comments? No. 3.2, notice of motion by Trustee Jennifer Reddy. She won't be at tonight's meeting. I guess I'll just read the motion if anyone wants to add to it or comments to it. She's not here to answer the questions, but we'll do the best we can. Per notice of motion from the board, it is recommended the Vancouver Board of Education work with the Vancouver Project Office to revise the Henry Hudson Elementary Seismic Project Definition Report to include 1, information on school site, existing and future programming, community context, consultation, equity, and reconciliation in the case of Henry Hudson Elementary, including kindergarten pressures, existing school programs, including French immersion, out of school care, daycare, portable lunch programs, and other non-enrolling and community uses. Information about the upcoming City of Vancouver Broadway plan, information about Molson land development. 2, recent announcement from Squamish Nation about 3,000 unit 2-tower development 200 meters from Hudson on Sunakwa, traditional Squamish territory, due for phased completion over 8 years. 3, uphold the rights of Squamish Nation to discuss their educational needs before decisions are made on the size and programming of the school. Open up for questions, comments. 3.3, notice of motion by trustee Jennifer Reddy. And I'll read it out. It is recommended that the VSB immediately remove the Cecil Road sign from the primary playground area of Lacolle Beleng, and any other reference to Cecil Roads be removed from the school property. Notice of the removal be sent to parents at the school and through social media channels to community members outlining the reasons for this removal. If someone else would like to comment, I haven't spoken directly how this will be presented. I heard through indirectly that it'll be moved as an urgent motion on Monday, June 24th. But that is a personal a motion, so I can't speak that it will or will not. Earlier on, I stated that there are a number of delegations that felt they missed, did not get the opportunity to speak on that. I will at the board meeting share with the board and trustee Reddy with regards to delegations and the process of how we try to deal with it as fair as possible. And if she would like to move the motion or to have further discussion, further delegations, then that will be shared. And I try to be as fair as possible to all parties respectfully. I had to make that decision with regards to the hard cutoff because some people, look at the site and see that it is that is the cutoff time, and they might not call in because of that. So just to be fair, and I would like to, I will share that on Monday. Any questions, comments with regards to this, Anne?
Unfortunately, Jennifer can't answer it herself, but perhaps it can be asked of her when she says any other reference to Cecil Roads be removed from the school property. Is she including all references to the previous school as well?
It's hard to say. I'm reading, and I probably shouldn't even guess on this. I'm thinking anywhere that it says Cecil Roads. I won't even answer that. Yeah, I'll bring that to the board of exactly to clarify that portion of any other reference. Yep. I'll write that down. Thanks. Anyone else? Any other reference? All right. Thank you. All right. Moving on, 4 items for approval. The 2020-2021 capital plan submission. Jim?
Through the chair, in April 2019, the Ministry of Education issued instructions to school districts of the province regarding submissions of the 2020-21 5-year capital plan. The capital plan is due no later than June 30th, 2019. A board-approved capital plan resolution is required along with a capital plan submission. So capital plan submission categories that are relevant to the school board, and I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation on that with the participation of Lisa Landry and James DeHoop. There is a resolution at the end of a recommendation at the end of the board report following the PowerPoint presentation, which is required to be passed by the board in order to submit the capital plan by the end of the month to the province. I'll just launch into the PowerPoint presentation. So the projects that that are eligible, or the categories of projects that are eligible are on the screen. There are both minor capital projects and major capital projects. The ones that are checkmarked are projects that are relevant to this board. For instance, we do not have buses, so the bus acquisition program would be more suitable to other districts, rural districts. Similarly, we don't, the school replacement program, the last item on major capital projects list, is more for rural school districts as well. Most of our school replacements come through either the seismic mitigation program or school expansion programs. The school replacement project program is more for school districts that don't have a seismic program anymore. So just to highlight what these categories mean, I'll just go through the following slides, and I think Jim will help me with some of these categories. Sorry. Do you want to take it from here, Jim?
Sure. So the school enhancement program is identified for improvement on safety, condition, and functionality of schools, and to extend their useful life. And as Doug McClary previously mentioned, ideally we'd have many more millions of dollars in this program area, but there's a limit of 5 submission categories. So rather than look at individual school locations, we group them into categories of priority elements under health and safety, elevators and accessibility, fire safety, water system upgrades, and copper pipe replacements. And these, most of these dovetail with the seismic mitigation program too. So we're leveraging the funding from the ministry to supplement some items that are not eligible for funding under the seismic program. So in the health and safety category, this is an outstanding item that requires safeguarding and replacement of dust collectors across 16 secondary schools for a total of 3.6 million. This would be done over 5 years, so it's not all in 1 year. The second category is elevators and accessibility. These schools that are undergoing seismic in the next year or two will need either accessibility modifications or elevators installed. Fire safety elements at Bing, Cavell, and Maquina. A water system upgrade at Maquina Elementary. This is for the fresh water and sewer improvements off-site. And then copper pipe replacements where there's lead solder found in the piping to remove and replace those across a number of schools. So that's the total for that category. Under the expansions, you'll see the list here from year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the priorities in year 1 are both the Falls Creek Elementary addition. That project is underway, and we're studying an option to go from 290 capacity to 410 capacity in the S&P program. So the Edith Cavell Elementary was discussed earlier this evening. We have a submission in year 1 for an expansion from 290 capacity to 510 capacity. And also in year 1, we want to formalize the site acquisition from the City of Vancouver for a new school at Olympic Village. That's in year 1 as well. And the second year, we're looking at an expansion to King George Secondary. The City of Vancouver, with the school board and the park board, is undertaking a 2-year master planning process. And we think in year 2, the request for a seismic upgrade along with an expansion to 1,000 capacity would be in order. So we put in for year 2 there. In year 3 would be the Olympic Village new construction of the school after the site acquisition is in place. That would be a 510 school. And in year 4, Hudson, we put in for the expansion there to increase the capacity from 365 to 510 capacity. And then in year 5, if the enrollment projections bear out, there would be a new school, elementary school at UBC in the Block F or Westbrook neighborhood. So those are the expansions and school additions that we'll be requesting. I think it's over to Lisa now.
Thank you, Jim. Through the chair. So the playground equipment program, this is a relatively new program. It's 2 years old now. It's very popular. We expect that all 60 school districts will be trying for this particular program. The ministry has released its criteria. Primary criteria for being funded under this program is the playground equipment, that there is none available or that it's unsafe for student use on the site. That's their primary funding. After that, they will also fund other schools and other school grounds as well. But they just this April, the ministry has indicated that all playground systems need to be accessible.
In terms of accessibility, we reviewed that broadly in terms of low incidence special ed designations, particularly A, B, and C. And we feel that this will be, the ministry requires justification for submitting for a universally accessible playground. So we feel that our best justification in getting the most that we can from the program is to illustrate the greatest number of students with accessibility needs being addressed with our submission. So Queen Victoria, this meets the first ministry criteria. This is one of the last of the wooden structures that are left in the district, and portions of the existing structure were lost just this past winter. So the structure will be removed. So there will be no playground at the site. There's only one playground at Queen Victoria. And in addition, it has, Queen Victoria has students with accessibility needs. The second proposal is for Admiral Seymour. So Seymour has students with accessibility needs. In addition to that, Seymour will also be hosting McKenna during their seismic upgrade, and McKenna also has students with accessibility needs, such that the number of the students with accessibility needs will actually double on site, with the two schools being there. And then finally, Moberly. Moberly also has students with accessibility needs. But further to that, DRPC is also located at Moberly, and so the playground will see use all summer as well with the students with DRPC. So our request of the ministry will be for a replacement playset for Queen Victoria and rubberized accessible surfacing for both Seymour and Moberly.
Through the chair, just jumping back to a major category, it's the seismic mitigation program. So we put together a list of criteria with respect to the priority of seismic mitigation programs. Some of these criteria have been around for a very long time. The first criteria and the second criteria are examples of that. So, and that's also ministry criteria. So the criteria with respect to existing or prior MOE supported, that's Ministry of Education support through a public announcement. So any schools that have been supported through public announcement or any time in the past have typically gone up to the top of the list with respect to priority projects. The second category has been a very important category, and the ministry also supports this category with respect to life safety. So this category B, seismic risk factor, measures the percentage of unstable building H1, H2 that requires seismic upgrade times the number of students in that school. So what this one is reflecting is purely life safety of the students. So a school that has many H1 blocks, which are high risk and has a high student population, would tend to move up to the top of the list. And this is criteria that has existed again for the board in multiple capital plan submissions. A criteria that's relatively new, but has been around for several years, is the availability of temporary accommodation sites. We cannot move the seismic mitigation program, Chair, through without having a temporary accommodation site for that school to go to. So that's been an important criteria for us. Some newer categories that have been important and have come up through board meetings is the number of surplus safe seats in surrounding schools. So this one relates to if there is enough safe seats in surrounding schools, that school wouldn't necessarily get priority to move forward because there's a number of safe seats in surrounding schools. We have so many seismic projects to do that all schools move forward on this category because we have a good amount of seismic projects still yet to complete. The distribution of seismically safe schools in the district. We want to be cognizant that we're doing a good distribution of schools in the district. We have a pretty good balance of, for instance, East schools versus West schools completed. So we want to continue that. The last item is in response to our long-range facilities plan. There's a number of criteria there that we wanted to address, mainly combining schools that should be studied together moving forward through the seismic mitigation program. Just for clarity, there's 5 years that we can submit in the capital plan submission. The ministry typically only takes a look at years 1 and 2 because that's still a lot of projects. Years 3 to 5 are notional projects for future planning. So it's year 1 and 2 that are the ones that typically move forward the following year when the ministry gives us the approval. So just wanted to give you a highlight what I spoke to about earlier, and that's the distribution of projects that have been completed to date. You can see that they do, you know, they're right across the district. We've done a number of seismic upgrades to date, and the different colors show the type of seismic upgrade, whether it's a full replacement, partial replacement, or a new school. Moving forward to the next slide. Just indicating what we have identified in the various category years. So for year 1, for the SMP project, we identified John Oliver as a top priority. Again, John Oliver has been announced in 2004 originally, so it's one of the oldest schools that has yet to be completed. So that's moved up to the top of the list. Renfrew Elementary has a significant amount of H1, H2 building blocks. Mackenzie as well. And we have a secondary school in year 1 as well, and that's Prince of Wales Secondary. Year 2 starts with Waverly Elementary, followed by Nightingale, King George, and Beaconsfield Elementary. Years 3, 4, and 5 are more notional projects. We have a number of secondary schools in year 3, Templeton and Britannia, Gladstone and Windermere, followed by McCorkindale and Osler. Year 4, we have Churchill, Franklin, Queen Alex, and Ochenna. The last year of our capital plan submission has Southlands, Bruce, Seymour, Grandview, Octay, Tilcombe, Annex, Cunningham, Carr, and Brock. So that rounds up the 5-year submission for our seismic mitigation program. So just jumping, sorry, through the chair, jumping back to that recommendation. The recommendation in the report before you, Chair, is that it is recommended that in accordance with provisions under Section 142(4) of the School Act, the Board of Education of School District number 39 approves the proposed 5-year capital plan as provided on the attached 5-year capital plan summary. So attached to the report is the summary that would be submitted to the Ministry of Education.
Jim. And just for clarification through the chair, I think I've shown another slide we may have skipped. The carbon neutral capital program is another small funding program. There's a limit of 3 submissions, and we've highlighted them here. The sustainability group, along with the ability of the staff to deliver, we've looked at all across the district and identified 2 heat plant replacement projects at John Norquay and Lord Selkirk Elementary, as well as some HVAC digital control systems for the Eric Amber and Swing site, secondary school site. So just thought, thanks. I think we skipped over it.
Thank you, Jim, and Lisa for that presentation. Open it up for questions, comments. First, Trustee Gonzalez.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a question on the proposed expansion where it lists the Falls Creek Olympic Village site. What is the deal with the acquisition there in terms of price, or is it an arrangement with the city? I'm just kind of curious what the background is on that.
Maybe I'll provide an answer, and Mr. Green or Mr. Mosquino can jump in. Because I work for the city, I can tell you that the city has an inventory of lands that it owns. It also has lands that are inside a property endowment fund. So certain properties that the city owns they're in that fund, and they're expected to draw market value from those properties. So at the time when the Olympic Village dream was created, the developer at the time, I think, donated the property. So it was to be at nominal value, but when the developer went bankrupt, the land reverted to the city under the Property Endowment Fund. And Jim Moschino can clarify that there was some correspondence from the city manager and general manager real estate at that time indicating that we'd have to pay a certain value. I think it was the 10 million was identified at that time, so that was a number of years ago. And if that option can be revisited or the policy can be revisited, we anticipate to do that. But the ministry requires the submission of the site acquisition first before asking for funding for the school.
Thank you, Jim. Trustee Parrott?
Chairperson, would it be possible to get a copy of the map that was in the PowerPoint with the different colored? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm being, yes. Janet.
For the carbon neutral capture program, it was on the slide that we can submit for 3 projects. I guess that explains why there's 3 in that. But for the SEP program, is there a funding limit that we work within, or is there a number of projects? How do we, are we asking for everything we can get, or are we asking for more than we expect? How is that number determined, the total?
Through the chair, we did review our initial list of requests with ministry staff, with the planning officer, and we did get an indication that it was a rather large ask. So we have actually scaled back some of the anticipated requests. So we've taken their comments into account. Having said that, it's still a fairly high number for sure. So I don't know if Jim, you have any other comments?
Through the chair, there is only 5 submissions allowed under the SCP. So we have bundled them as per the ministry's requirements with respect to the different categories.
And also to the chair, we some of the projects, the ones that in particular the elevators and accessibility categories, those are related to enhancements for seismic projects. Some of those are. And we've had some preliminary conversations with the ministry about, maybe making sure we get those ones approved so that they can be incorporated into design work in the seismic projects. And while the ministry didn't come out definitively and say that they were pre-approved, but I think we had some, strong indication that that probably would be the case.
Along the same lines as Trustee Fraser's comments, F, the proposed playground equipment program, playground equipment. I think last year we submitted 3 and we got all 3. Is there a limit of the 3? Or is there a concern of submitting 4 if we can submit 4?
Through the chair, you can only submit up to 3.
All right, thank you. Trustee Fraser.
When there's the seismic mitigation project list and it goes through from year 1 to year 5, are all the schools that are seismically unsafe in the district on that list? Or are there more schools that are beyond it?
Through the chair, H3 schools are not all H3 schools are on the list. So there are some schools that would be subsequent capital plan submission.
Yes.
So a separate question. In the seismic program, so the expansion submissions, what we heard from the Cavell delegation was that the position in the listing matters to the ministry. I wasn't aware, I haven't heard that from the ministry. Is that correct? And would there be value to putting Edith Cavell top of the list in year 1 because that project is further ahead than False Creek?
One moment. Through the chair, the ministry does typically look at them in the priority that we submit them. So in their eyes, False Creek would be a higher priority than Cavell. However, they could choose to approve Cavell. I mean, they don't have to follow our list, but typically they like to follow our list.
So what I think I'm hearing is that from the district's perspective, the False Creek addition is a higher priority than the Cavell addition at this time.
One moment.
Through the chair, if I can add, I think the timing of the Edith Cavell addition would likely be an addition after the seismic upgrade. And False Creek is at a state where it could dovetail in together during the seismic upgrade. So that's one of the considerations is the risk of delaying the Edith Cavell processing.
Sorry, I think you mean the risk of delaying the False Creek seismic project.
That as well, but I think the Cavell, the scope for the project has been approved, is my understanding, for the seismic. So it's already approved, and the addition is anticipated as an add-on at a subsequent time. Even if it is year one, you still have to go through the scoping process.
Further? Yes.
I still on the school expansion table. Henry Hudson is given in year 4, and you know, we heard the presentation that's not quite certain when the development would happen and how fast it would come, but is there value to moving it higher to try and sort of, you know, if the development happens quickly, to be further ahead?
I think with the decision that the board made to slowly phase out French immersion at Hudson, the requirement for the addition is less so. We anticipate that if there is any development that comes out of the Squamish First Nation, that's quite a few years away. And we heard that today as well. So the priority for Hudson has dropped with the decision to slowly phase up the French immersion at that school. There is more pressure at False Creek and Cavell for sure.
So I think what I understand from having Henry Hudson addition at that point is that it wouldn't be part of the seismic program. It would be a separate piece of construction. And presumably that's because with the uncertainty around the development at the moment, the expectation is the ministry wouldn't approve a larger school for the seismic project.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Anne?
Just out of curiosity, looking at the SMP with Mackenzie in year 1, Emily Carr down in year 5, and what was running through my brain was Emily Carr is one of the closer schools to Cavell. If there is a boundary review again and we're trying to move things around, Carr is closest to the Canby corridor, and there will be more building on Oak Street as well. And I'm wondering if there was any thought to possibly changing priorities of the schools again in terms of what developments are already in the area.
Through the chair, that's a great suggestion. We weighed a number of issues such as that one. But the overriding concern when we looked at CAR is that even though it's got a very strong school population, the area of H1, H2 block is very small. I believe it's only 18% of that school. So most of the school is safe. So that's why it's in the position it's at. While the other school that you mentioned has a higher safety risk factor. So all things considered, we felt it was important to stick to that criteria of student safety first.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So committee members, move the recommendation to the board. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Cognizant of time, the trustees have another meeting at 8 o'clock. So I'm sorry, going to move these three quickly along as there's not another committee meeting this year. Hamber Secondary Childcare Bylaw. Jim.
Through the chair, this is the 5th time we've brought this type of a bylaw to the board. Prior to this one, the board has approved bylaws to include a childcare 0 to 4 City of Vancouver funded childcare at Nelson, Fleming, Tennyson, and David Lloyd George. The city has expressed an interest to include a 0 to 4 childcare at Hamber as well. It's an approximate $9 million investment that the city is making in each one of these schools. The childcare is not owned by the city. It's leased for 50 years plus 15-year renewable. Sorry, 60-year plus 15-year renewable. But in order for us to approve, for the board to consider this and potentially approve it, there is a land disposition requirement pursuant to policy number 20, which states that anything that's over a 10-year lease has to be approved by the board and subsequently the ministry. So if the board approves it, it would go for ministry approval. The ministry has no concerns. They've already approved Nelson, Fleming, and I think Tennyson and David Lloyd George are before them. We consider this a good news story where we can combine new school construction with childcare construction. Your report identifies on page 2 the major terms of the offer to lease with the City of Vancouver. I just want to make it clear that any costs associated with the childcare, whether it's design, construction, or occupancy, are not borne at all by the VSB. They're 100% City of Vancouver funded, so none of the funding, education funding, is used for the childcare. But it does present a great opportunity. It is a cost saving for the city to build on our schools because there's no land costs, and they take advantage of the foundations that we're building for the school anyway. So it's based on incremental cost. Any costs that the childcare imposes on the school gets paid for by the city. So an open house was held at Eric Hamber on January 11th to share the plans for a replacement school, and the possible partnership with the city to construct a 0-4 childcare. The community generally supported the inclusion of the childcare as part of the new school. So there is a recommendation attached to this report that requires 3 readings, and forward that to the board.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Move to the board. Thank you. Move to the board. Thank you, Jim. Okay. 4.3, Crosstown Elementary Indigenous Name and Pronunciation. Jim Machino and Chaz Desjardins.
Through the chair, I'll introduce the report, but Chaz here is here to continue with the discussion item of the report. So Crosstown Elementary School was named Crosstown Elementary by the board in November 14, 2016. At that time, there was discussion about the inclusion of an Aboriginal name for the school. So on December 7th, 2016, the naming committee reformed for considering the inclusion of an Aboriginal name for the school. There was discussion with DPAC and Vesta, and we've included their comments in the report on page 2 of the report. And the consensus that was reached by the board was that there be no change to the recommendation for Crosstown, with the proviso that the naming committee be reconvened once the school is in session with a full complement of administrators, teaching staff, and students to consider a dual name for the school. So my apologies, the December 7th meeting was a committee meeting. And I'm just going to turn it over to Chaz, because the first meeting once the committee reconvened was actually on June 12th, 2018. Or is that correct? No, sorry. Yes, that's correct. Over to you, Chaz.
So on June 12, 2018, naming committee reconvened to discuss the option for the additional Indigenous name for Crosstown Elementary. Lisa Deminato, Richard Zerby, Aaron Bartlett, Jolene, myself, and Heather Allison were part of that discussion. Within that discussion, following names were discussed. PAC community, there had been already some discussion about, you know, from the students and the community stakeholders, some ideas of what they had hoped the name would be. And you can see underneath the PAC community a very vast list there of names, from A Growing Village to Our Children Are Sacred, Crow's Nest, The Nest, Dreaming of Sanok, Gathering Place. The student community came up with their ideas. The one in bolded are the ones that were shortlisted, but we have Near the Sea, Near the Water, By the Shore, Crows, Ravens, Sports, Freedom, Tribe, Maple Leafs, Tradition Downtown, Place of Learning, Place of Play and Learn, School of Experiments, Thinking with Our Brains, Community, Loyal, Colorful, Growing, Kind, Sunny, The House of, Learning School, Teaching School, Science World School, Castle School, Earth School, Grow School, Children's School, Everything School. So, you know, we have a very extensive and diverse list of names here. And following the discussion, the committee shortlisted the proposed name to the ones that you see bolded there. Prior to that, I was invited to meet with the PAC, and they sought some guidance from myself in regards to looking at all the names, potential names they put forth. And I thought it was a good idea for them to get an idea of what that area was prior to the arrival of the Europeans. And so the PAC had no kind of historical context in regards to how that land was used by the Musqueam Squamish people. So I shared with them the story of Sanok, written by Lee Miracle. And in that story, she talks about Sanok and how it was used by her people. So I wanted to give the parents of the PAC an idea of what that was all about, just to kind of give them some information so that they could be informed about, when they were looking at their list, what names would be most appropriate if we're going with place-based names and contextualized names that actually have significant meaning and is connected to the history of the peoples that originally come from that land. So it was through that discussion, I provided that document with them. They read it, and we met an additional time period after that. I met with the PAC twice, and it's from there, the shortlisted, the ones that you see in bold: Near the Water, Near the Sea, By the Shore. And it was at that time, when I was in discussion with the PAC, I had suggested, and with the committee, that it would probably be advisable that we connect with Musqueam to get some guidance around the history of the land, and how, you know, it's important to follow, you know, place-based names and the significance of that. And so I reached out to the language department at Musqueam and began to make those connections with the appropriate people there. I had spoke with Larry Grant, and there was an extensive time period of where he had to do his research and speak to notable people from his community. So Larry Grant, respected Musqueam elder and member of the Musqueam Language Department, he received the input from Crosstown Elementary School community. So he took all those suggestions from the PAC and the students and the shortlisted ones that that you can see in the document that's bolded. And based on all of that and all the research that he did, the extensive research that he did, looking at, going through Musqueam archives and speaking to the other elders and knowledgeable community members, they came up with one suggestion for the naming of the school being Where the Land Meets the Water. And this was through his own research of the area. He proposed, because, Crosstown is located near water, and, that was logical, and that theme became, evident through discussion with the students in the PAC themselves. So with their work, Larry Grant's work with himself and Vanessa and Jill Campbell, who are also members of the language department at Musqueam, they came up with Shokwesin, which is the Hunkaminam word, which you can see is referenced on page 4, which references a mode of transportation used by Musqueam people whereby they caught the tide as a shortcut from False Creek to Burrard Inlet. The meaning of this name is generally translated as the place from which one can catch the tide, and that is quoted by Jill Campbell, Musqueam Language Department. So we've been working, very diligently strengthening our relationship with the Musqueam Language Department and asking them to provide us with an audio clip, because we hope to do some curriculum and for the schools and providing that historical context. And so Larry Grant provided us with the pronunciation of Shokwesin, and I'm sure he's going to say it much better than I am. I'm still practicing as everybody is learning. Hunkaminam. And so I'm going to just share his audio clip with you so you can hear it, and I'll play it a few times. And we will be passing this on to the school itself with some historical context and how to share this with the students and the broader school community. And this is something that we have come to an agreement with the Musqueam Language Department, and they're really keen to build the relationships to ensure that the name is received well. And from this point onwards, next year we can begin to think about going through the official ceremony of Crosstown receiving the Hunkaminam name. So I'm just going to play this a couple times.
Was it? Schwok 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 was it?
So that's Elder Larry Grant, and I'm very grateful for him to provide us with that audio clip. I think it will be serve the school community well, and everybody can begin to learn how to pronounce Shokwesit properly and learn about the history and the place-based connection that Crosstown sits on. So the Indigenous Education Department and the Vancouver School Board of Education are excited to announce the Indigenous name of Crosstown Elementary School. And like I said earlier, the naming committee has been working closely in consultation with the Musqueam Indian Band, Crosstown stakeholders, including staff, students, and the PAC executive, in brainstorming appropriate suggestions. The proposed name is the language of Hunkaminam, the ancestral language of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. The Indigenous Education Department has also been successful in obtaining a pronunciation for the proposed name, which I've already shared with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chaz. And through the chair, the report has a recommendation. It is recommended that Crosstown Elementary be given the additional name of Shokwesin.
Thank you, Chaz. Thank you, Jim. Barb.
Thank you, Chair. Could you remind me of the process that we use for naming schools? So I understand from the document that the school naming committee met and came up with some suggestions, and then the PAC met and came up with suggestions, and the students met and came up with a whole bunch of suggestions. And then from that list, the committee shortlisted the 3 names. And then we got another suggestion from Larry Grant. So did that suggestion go back to the committee and they thought that that was the best name, or I'm a little bit unclear of the process.
Chaz or Jim?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I recommended to the school that they take guidance from Elder Larry Grant, because place-based names are very crucial in if we're going to rename a school using a traditional language, that it actually be connected to the land in which the school is situated on. And so I made the suggestion to the school based on all the names that were a potential list of names that were put forward. We discussed as a committee that, you know, water was significant, and I had shown Larry the recommendations, and I know the history of SNOC. I've read, I'm familiar with that, and so I advised the committee that they take the ones that were recommended in the bold, and that I would share those with Larry Grant. And from there, and I advised that whatever Larry comes up with, there would probably be a connection to what they suggested. So he placed those forward to Larry Grant and left it in his hand to do the research. And as the result, we came up with, he came up with Shokwis, and which the history is tied to that area. So that was
Our follow-up.
Yeah, I understand all that. I'm wondering about the process. Is that the process that is in policy or administrative handbook, that that the committee suggests a few names, and then if we want to use an Indigenous name, it goes to the elders of the community, and then that's accepted? Or is the process that suggestion should go back to the committee?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if this is following. This is an additional name. So did this go back to the school, the students, and then for them to have that discussion and then mutually agree upon that and come back?
I can speak to this very briefly through the chair. My recollection is that the recommendation of near the sea, near the water, by the shore, in cases cannot be directly translated to an Aboriginal name. So I think the way that it worked is that those names were provided to Larry Grant to try and come up with a name that best represents what the shortlisted 3 names were. So there may not be something that says near the sea in one word. So there was work done to try and determine how can an Aboriginal name best represent the 3 shortlisted comments that were received by both PAC students at the school. So not sure if that's identified specifically in policy, but the policy does state that the committee shortlists and brings forward to the board a recommended name. It's up to the board whether they accept that name or they ask the committee to reconvene to come up with another name.
Are you're trying to ask that if it went back to the students and if the students they felt they had input and they agreed and supported this, or did they come up with a list and Elder Larry Grant then came up with this, but there's no connection back to the original list of names by the students? Did I get that correct? No. Okay.
Sorry. I really like the name, don't get me wrong. It's just the process. And you said that the policy says that the committee recommends a name to the board. Is the committee, what I want to know is the committee recommending this name to the board?
The committee of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Did the committee of 6 support this name? Oh, I guess, well, Lisa Dominato is no longer, she's on council now. So 5 then.
Yes, the committee accepted the proposal by Larry Grant.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so oh, Jill, yes.
Just a question through the chair. Has there been any discussion about how this name will be displayed in the school? Crosstown has a very prominent sign with the name Crosstown. I'm just wondering where this name will be in the school.
Okay, through the chair, I met with the principal today of the school and I shared the committee report with her and we did agree to meet and I'll do Chaz in those meetings to discuss the next steps. So no, those things haven't been decided yet, but we will work with the school community to put up the new name at the school as appropriate. Barb?
Thank you. And I would appreciate, Chair, that in any documents that the board produces, that the name be mentioned beside the Crosstown name. Quite often with Grandview Equinacoo, I think we only often list just Grandview. And I think it's really important that we honor the Indigenous name as well by including it.
Agreed. Committee members agree? I presume yes, yes. Thank you. All right, so move that to the board. Thank you, Chaz. Thank you, Jim. Final agenda item, Shannon Park Annex, BC Hydro right-of-way. Jim?
Through the chair, it is often the case that when BC Hydro puts in a new service to a school site that a right-of-way is required. We've brought a number of these types of reports to the board for approval. Again, because property is involved, a formal land disposition is required on this as well. So just a bit of background on this one. The VSB leases Shannon Park Annex site to the Hebrew Academy, and we've been doing that since 2003. The Vancouver Hebrew Academy is proceeding with construction of a new modular facility to replace antiquated three old portables on their site, and that requires a new electrical service to the site. So we have attached to the report a drawing showing the location of the right-of-way, and that's purely to house a transformer on our site, a BC Hydro transformer. And the right-of-way allows BC Hydro to work on that transformer in the future. So that's why the BC Hydro requires that right-of-way. So because it's land disposition, there is a recommendation to this report, and the recommendation is that the Board of Education of Vancouver, Shannon Park Annex right-of-way. That the Board of Education of School District Number Vancouver, Shannon Park Annex right-of-way be read the first time, 24th day of June 2019, and then follow that. There's 3 more readings required for this to move forward. So move that this goes to the board.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Move to the board. Yes, thank you. All right, thank you very much. One more item? Yes. Okay. All right, thank you. And particular, just this is the last meeting for the committee. And I hope everyone returns next year. I know this facilities and planning committee has been very, very challenging this year with the number of committees and as well as presidents of your respective organizations coming along to a number of those meetings as well. And the trustees and staff has commented numerous times with regards to the length and number of committee meetings. So we couldn't have done this without you to move along many of the issues. I think the long range facilities plan, a lot of the discussions, we almost took 2 years worth of work into this year. So there has been a lot of time spent and a lot of input by yourselves. And so thank you. And if you can thank your presidents of your organizations as well for being part of that discussion. So we do recognize that. So thank you. And I do hope you come back and in a positive note with regards to the number. I'll try to have less meetings for next year. So share that with whoever is going to be coming back in the new year to facilities and planning. In particular, tonight's the last committee meeting for Doug McCleary. Doug has been with us and in supporting us, and myself, I look towards him, especially for the annual facilities grant. That information, my best report I've ever received was the reference with regards to the District of Columbia, Washington, reference to the school board annual facilities grant. So sorry that we'll be losing Doug. He's retiring after 38 years. But we're happy for Doug. He's the manager of maintenance and construction, and also saw him as auctioneer for the United Way. Very good. All dressed up as well for that. He advocated for the facilities and planning department for all these years. So do appreciate that. I know you're passionate about your yachting, and so hope you have time with yourself and your wife. I don't know how you stay on that boat, up and down, but thank you very much. I've always stated every year when you presented your slideshow about the maintenance of the summer and through the year, and I always say next year we'll put you on the top of the list, and because towards the end we always we have to end the day because it's quite lengthy. So that's on me for that, but we do respect it. I really enjoyed and appreciate your presentations, whether it's just the slideshow or whether it's the annual facilities grant presentation. So presentations are always professional and clear. So with utmost respect and thanks, Doug, for all your years, 38 years. So thank you very much. Janet.
So I'd like to echo Alan's thanks to you, Doug, and congratulations on your retirement, and also to acknowledge the DPAC representative, Anne Montgomery, whose child is graduating from the VSB, and acknowledge that the dedication, commitment, and expertise you've brought to this committee for a number of years. So thank you.
We have
a small token of appreciation, Doug, for his 38 years of service on behalf of the board and management staff, that we thought we would get you a little token of appreciation that you could, hang somewhere and remember us by. Get a picture of that, Tricia. What? Oh, very much.